10th, 2021 meeting of the San Francisco Ethics Commission. This meeting is being held by teleconference pursuant to the Governor's Executive Order N-29-20 and the 12th supplement to the mayoral proclamation declaring the existence of a local emergency dated February 25th, 2020. And before we proceed, I ask today's moderator, Mr. Ronald Contreras, to go over some of the procedures for today's meeting. Mr. Moderator?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The minutes of this meeting will reflect that due to the COVID-19 health emergency and to protect Commission members, city employees, and the public, the meeting rooms of City Hall are closed. However, Commission members and staff will be participating in today's meeting remotely. This precaution is taken pursuant to the various local, state, and federal orders, declarations, and directives. Commission members will attend the meeting through a video conference and participate in the meeting to the same extent as if they were physically present. Please note that today's meeting is being live cablecast on SFGov TV and streamed live online at sfgovtv.org/ethicslive. Once again, streamed live online at sfgovtv.org/ethicslive. Public comment will be available on each item on this agenda. Each member of the public will be allowed 3 minutes to speak. Comments or opportunity to speak during the public comment period are available via phone by calling 1-415-655-0001. Again, the phone number is 1-415-655-0001. Access code is 24998041060. Again, the access code is 24998041060, followed by the pound sign. Then press pound again to join as an attendee. You will hear a beep when you are connected to the meeting. You will be automatically muted and in listening mode only. When your item of interest comes up, dial *3 to raise your hand and to be added to the public comment line. You will then hear you have raised your hand to ask a question. Please wait until the host calls on you. The line will be silent as you wait your turn to speak. Ensure that you are in a quiet location. Before you speak, mute the sound of any equipment around you, including television, radio, or computer. It is especially important that you mute your computer if you are watching via the web link to prevent feedback and echo when you speak. When the system message says, "Your line has been unmuted," this is your turn to speak. You will hear staff say, "Welcome, caller." We encourage you to state your name clearly. As soon as you begin speaking, you will have 3 minutes to provide your public comment, 6 minutes if you're online with an interpreter. You will hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. If you change your mind and wish to withdraw yourself from the public comment line, press *3 again. You will hear the system say, "You have lowered your hand." Once your 3 minutes have expired, staff will thank you and mute you. You will hear, "Your line has been muted." Attendees who wish to speak during other public comment periods may stay on the line and listen for the next public comment opportunity and should raise their hands to enter the public comment line by pressing *3 when their next item of interest comes up. Public comment may also be submitted in writing and will be shared with the Commission after this meeting has concluded and will be included as part of the official meeting file. Excuse me. Written comments should be sent to ethics.commission@sfgov.org. Once again, written comments should be sent to the ethics.commission@sfgov.org. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, moderator. And with that, I'll call the meeting to order. And let's proceed to agenda item number 1, which is roll call, please.
Commissioners, please unmute your microphone so that you can verbally state you're present at today's meeting after your name is called. Commissioner Bush.
Present.
Commissioner Chu.
Present.
Chair Lee.
Present.
Commissioner Bell.
I think Commissioner Bell is having technical issues accessing the meeting, but he definitely will be joining us shortly.
Madam Chair, with 3 members present and accounted for, you have a quorum.
Okay, and again, welcome to today's meeting. Let's proceed to agenda item number 2, Public comment on matters appearing or not appearing on today's agenda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Ethics Commission is now receiving public comment on Agenda Item 2 remotely in this meeting. Each member of the public will have up to 3 minutes to provide public comment. If you joined the meeting early to listen to the proceedings, now is your time to get in line to speak. If you have not already, please press *3. It is important that you press *3 only once to enter the queue, as pressing it again will move you out of the public comment line and back into listening mode. Once you are in the queue and standing by, the system will prompt you when it's your turn to speak. So it's important that you call from a quiet location. Please address your comment to the Commission as a whole and not to individual members. Madam Chair, we are checking to see if there are callers in the queue. If you've just joined this meeting, we are currently on Agenda Item 2, public comment on matters appearing or not appearing on the agenda. You will have 3 minutes to provide your public comment, 6 minutes if you're online with an interpreter. You'll hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. If you have not already done so, please press *3 to be added to the queue. For those already on hold, please continue to wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted. Please stand by. Welcome, caller. Your 3 minutes begins now.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Jason Seifer, and I'm the CFO at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco, as well as its 2 associated nonprofits. So for nearly 60 years, our museums have been supported by 2 various 501c3s in support of all of our programs, including education and exhibitions. And I think it's important to understand that 75% of our museum operations actually flow through our 501c3s. And this supports over 250 employees, 1.5 million visitors a year who come through our doors, and over 50,000 students who come through our education programs. Over 50% of our budget is actually related to fundraising. And during the COVID-19 shutdowns, fundraising has been vital to continue operations and keep our employees employed. Our department head actually serves as both the head of the museums, as our museum director, and the department head and head of the 501c3s. And he's actually also our chief fundraiser. So what we're concerned about today is any changes to laws, gift laws in particular, that could fundamentally impact the museums, affecting our employees and also the programs and public that we serve. So there's been no outreach by any of the Ethics Commission staff to the museums or ourselves to actually discuss any of the operational implications of some of the upcoming items on your agenda today. And we're very highly concerned about the legal impacts because we have not been able to review any of them. We only just heard about over 200 pages of changes to gift law legislation just in the past 2 days. And this could fundamentally upend 60 years of activity that have been going on at the museums. So we ask that the Commission postpone any fundamental action on items 6 and 7 that are coming up on your agenda regarding gift laws until February, so that we can properly meet with Ethics Commission staff. Our lawyers can review these new rules, and we can fundamentally understand how they could affect our operations. So thank you for that consideration of a postponement, because we think it's very important, and we are highly concerned about any surprises that could affect any of our programs, the public, and our employees who are dependent upon their roles at the museum for their employment. So thank you very much, and I'm open to discussing any of this with you offline. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please stand by. Thank you, caller. We have another caller in the queue. Please stand by. Good morning, caller. Your 3 minutes begins now.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Robert Mintz. I'm the Deputy Director for the Asian Art Museum, a charitable trust department of the City and County of San Francisco. I'd like to echo Mr. Seifer's comments that you just heard. We too, as a combination city department and 501c3 foundation, operate the museum and employ over 200 people here in the City of San Francisco. We too would like to urge you to postpone action on items 6 and 7 on today's agenda, as we would like to review the content of that very important work done by the Ethics Commission staff over the last several months. We feel that the impacts could be substantial, yet we need time to review the content of that information prior to its being moved forward for placement on the ballot in June of 2022. So we urge you to postpone your actions and hope that you understand our desire to contribute to your efforts at improving ethics within San Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mintz.
I think our moderator is muted.
Thank you. Madam Chair, there are no further callers in the queue.
Is it appropriate to ask a question about the public comment that was just received? Does the agenda allow me to ask a question?
Commissioner Bush, is the question going to be directed at the speakers or the staff?
At the staff.
If it's very, very brief, I believe the public commenters did speak to items that are later on the agenda. We should try to focus as much of the discussion as possible there. But if you have a very brief follow-up question.
Thank you. My question is whether or not those speakers are among people who receive advance notices of not just the commission meeting, but our topics. So for example, we've been noticing for some months a discussion on these two items. Are these department heads among those in our interested persons list who routinely receive notices?
I believe we have Pat Ford online. Commissioner Bush, in response to your question, we did do interested persons meetings.
I'm in the meeting.
November. I'm not sure if there's any more detail we have at this moment, but we can follow up with you.
Commissioner Bush, if I might, since this is going to be part of the agenda item number 6 and 7 discussion, maybe we can hold off until we can have a more thorough discussion. Would that work for you? You're muted.
That's fine. But can we just get a yes or a no that groups like this routinely are notified of upcoming ethics meetings, whatever the topics?
Yeah, I would have to check our interested persons list to see if those individuals have chosen to be updated about what the commission is doing.
Okay. That's a start. Thank you.
Next caller, please.
There are no further callers in the queue, Commissioner.
Okay. Since there are no more public comment, agenda item number 2 is closed. Let's proceed to consent calendars. Items number 3 to 5 first. Agenda item number 3, approval of the November 12th meeting minutes. Questions? Okay, I see no hands raised. No questions. So let's proceed, Mr. Moderator, to public comments, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Ethics Commission is now receiving public comment on consent calendar item number 3 remotely in this meeting. Each member of the public will have up to 3 minutes to provide public comment. You'll hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. If you joined the meeting earlier to listen to the proceedings, now is the time to get in line to speak. If you have not already done so, please press *3. It is important that you press *3 only once to enter the queue, as pressing it again will move you out of the public comment line and back into listening mode. Once you are in the queue and standing by, the system will prompt you when it's your turn to speak, so it's important that you call from a quiet location. Please address your comment to the Commission as a whole and not to individual members. Madam Chair, we are checking to see if there are any callers in the queue. Please stand by. If you have not already done so, please press *3 to be added to the queue. For those already on hold, please continue to wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted. If you have just joined this meeting, we are currently taking public comment on consent calendar item 3, draft minutes of the Commission's November 12, 2021 regular meeting. If you have not already done so, please press *3 to be added to the public comment queue. Stand by. Madam Chair, there are no callers in the queue.
Okay, public comment is closed. Commissioners, do I have a motion to approve the minutes of November 12th?
So moved.
Oh, good morning, Commissioner Bell.
Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioner Bell. I'll second.
Okay.
A motion has been made and seconded. I will now call the roll. Commissioner Bush.
Aye.
Commissioner Chu.
Aye.
Chair Lee.
Aye.
Commissioner Bell.
Aye.
With 4 votes in the affirmative and 0 votes opposed, the motion is approved unanimously.
Okay. Let's proceed to agenda item number 4, resolution on the continuation of remote commission meeting. Colleagues, this is the same resolution that we've been voting on the past few months. So if there's no comments, let's go to public comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Ethics Commission is now receiving public comment on consent calendar item 4 remotely in this meeting. Each member of the public will have up to 3 minutes to provide public comment. You will hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. If you've just joined this meeting early to listen to the proceedings, now is the time to get in line to speak. If you have not already done so, please press *3. It's important that you only press *3 once to enter the queue, as pressing it again will move you out of the public comment line and back into listening mode. Once you are in the queue and standing by, the system will prompt you when it's your turn to speak, so it's important that you call from a quiet location. Please address your comments to the Commission as a whole and not to individual members. If you've just joined this meeting, we are currently taking public comment on consent calendar item number 4, resolution of continuation of remote commission meetings. If you have not already done so, please press *3 to be added to the public comment queue. Please stand by. Madam Chair, there are no callers in the queue.
Okay, public comment is closed for agenda item number 4, so please call the roll. Oh, sorry, we have a motion. So moved.
Second.
A motion has been made and seconded. I will now call the roll. Commissioner Bush.
Aye.
Commissioner Chu.
Aye.
Chair Lee.
Aye.
Commissioner Bell.
Aye.
With 4 votes in the affirmative and 0 votes opposed, the motion is approved unanimously.
Thank you. Agenda item number 5, which is the Ethics Commission's regular meeting schedule for the new calendar year. I think we all have checked with our very busy schedule for 2022. So any discussions, questions? Commissioner Bush.
Yes, I want to discuss the start time, which is at 9:30. And I know that there are some other people who are concerned about that as well. Is there a possibility of having a start at 10:30 instead of 9:30? I didn't know if the problem was having a room with access to a sound system and a call-in system at that hour.
Chair Lee, if I might respond.
Please.
I think we have flexibility given the nature of our remote meetings. We don't yet know, as you know from the executive director's report last month, and it remains the same today, that we do not yet have a specific date for when we would be resuming meetings back in City Hall and a remote meeting calendar. One of the issues we do have is that a change in the time of the commission's meeting would require a bylaws change, as the meetings do under Article 7, Section 4 provide that the regular meetings begin at 9:30 a.m. So we may wish to just seek a comment from the city attorney about the process for the bylaws change, but I believe that requires a separate notice. So one option would be to adopt a calendar, so at least we confirm the dates of commission meetings going forward, if those work for the commission. And then if the commission wishes to meet it starting at 10:30, perhaps issuing a bylaws change to that effect for the January meeting. But I see City Attorney Shen online.
Yeah, just very briefly confirming what Executive Director Pelham just said. To change the regular meeting time for the commission, we would need to do a bylaws change, which requires 15 days notice.
So my question is, if we were to issue our regular meeting notice, if we could change the meeting, let's just say for January, if we want to start at 10:30 or 11, does that also require a bylaw change or just a public notice change?
I believe we could notice that meeting with a later start date, and we would note on it that it is a later, the specific time change for that particular meeting. And I think that's, again, a question of if it's a recurring meeting schedule change, then that should be accomplished through bylaws. But I believe in the past we have adjusted either the location or the time on a single meeting. And I guess, would that make it a special meeting, City Attorney Shen, or would that continue to be a regular meeting if it were adopted as part of a action today?
If it's a one-time, just sort of slight time change, that may not be required to be a special meeting, especially if it's in the same date and in the same location, to the extent location means anything nowadays. So it wouldn't need to be a special meeting, but I should correct myself. I accidentally misspoke. To make amendments to the bylaws, we would need to provide 10 days notice, not 15. My apologies.
So would it, if we were to make changes for off-site meetings, maybe it's going to happen for the next half a year, we don't know. Does that also require a bylaw change? Let's just say that, as long as we're going to have these off-site meetings, we will be meeting at 12 instead of 9:30. So does that require a bylaw change? I would assume so.
Yeah, so over the past year, I think we've been a little bit flexible about meeting times and dates.
Mm-hmm.
Just given obviously all the things that have been going on in the world. So I think we have been trying to be flexible, especially since we're also meeting remotely, which does give us some more options in some respects. In terms of this item and Commissioner Bush's proposal, how would be helpful to see if other commissioners are supportive of a similar time change, and then we can decide how to move that forward.
Okay. Because I do remember the 9:30 time was connected to the availability of the meeting room, right? That's why we chose 9:30. Okay. Okay.
Commissioner Lee,
Yes, Commissioner Chu.
just a thought, if we are changing the start time of our meeting from 9:30 to a later time, would put out for consideration an afternoon start time to see if we might, that time change might facilitate a little bit more public participation, since it would be, you know, not at the start of a business day or in the middle of a business day, but later towards the business day in the afternoon perhaps might allow more people to participate remotely.
Okay. Maybe I could suggest for all of us to submit to Director Pelham the desired time that we may want to see for the remote meetings, not for the permanent meetings, at least to try it out for the remote meeting time. And then if everyone agrees to have an afternoon meeting, and if we're all available, then let's try that, you know, with the proper notice for the temporary change. Would that work for everybody?
Yes.
It works for me. I think there's a lot to be said for an afternoon meeting, even as late as 2 in the afternoon. Excuse me, as late as 5 o'clock, then it would go into the evening. But it used to be that was the time for the meetings. And I do agree that we ought to be flexible to encourage greater public participation.
Okay, so let's open up for public comment on the agenda item number 5.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Ethics Commission is now receiving public comment on consent calendar item 5 remotely in this meeting. Each member of the public will have up to 3 minutes to provide public comment. You'll hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. If you joined the meeting early to listen to the proceedings, now is the time to get in line to speak. If you've not already done so, please press *3. It is important that you press *3 only once to enter the queue, as pressing it again will move you out of the public comment line and back into listening mode. Once you're in the queue and standing by, the system will prompt you when it's your turn to speak. So it's important that you call from a quiet location. Madam Chair, we are checking to see if there are callers in the queue. Please stand by. If you have not already done so, please press *3 to be added to the queue. For those already on hold, please continue to wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted. If you've just joined this meeting, we are currently taking public comment on consent calendar item 5, Ethics Commission regular meeting schedule for calendar year 2022. If you've not already done so, please press *3 to be added to the public comment queue. Stand by. Madam Chair, there are no callers in the queue.
Okay, thank you. I don't think we need to take action on this, right, Director Pelham?
Chairley, it sounds like the commission's desire would be to have individual commissioners send me their preferred start times, and that we would resume action or consideration of this item at the January meeting, once we know that information. Right. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. And now let's proceed to regular calendar agenda item.
Let me just ask, was it, my understanding was that we might be changing the January meeting as well?
That was not my understanding or awareness. No, it looks like the Friday, the January the 14th date was confirmed by all commissioners in terms of availability. And then we have a special meeting January 21st for our first required hearing on the budget priorities.
I agree that the date seems to be working for everybody, but were we considering a one-time notification of a time change for that meeting?
We could. My understanding is it takes if it's a one-time only change, Deputy City Attorney, it would take just 10 days of advance notice. So if for whatever reason we want to move the time of the January meeting, I think that we would need to do a 10-day public notice.
Sorry if I wasn't clear, so my apologies. So if we want to make a permanent, going forward change to the regular meeting date and time, we would need to do a bylaws change, which does require more advance notice, the 10 days that I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
But if we want to simply change the time of a single meeting on a one-off basis, and we're already scheduled to meet that day, I don't think we need to do a bylaws change. We could do that on a one-off basis.
So for January, we can change it to 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock.
That's
right?
correct.
For January.
Right. And I would just urge the staff when preparing that agenda just to simply have a note at the top sort of indicating this is a different time than usual, something to that effect.
Okay. Okay. I lost my train of thought. I think we had public comment already on this, right? So there was no public comment. So we are now on agenda item number 6, which is discussion and possible action and proposal regarding a possible June 2022 ballot measure to prohibit certain city officials from soliciting behested payments from interested parties. Before we proceed, I want to take the prerogative as chair to say that let there be no doubt this commission's resolve in rebuilding the public's trust for a clean, good San Francisco government. To this end, since the corruption scandal erupted about a couple of years ago, this commission has worked diligently to explore every opportunity to tighten up the loopholes that was exposed, toughen penalties that was needed, and to strengthen accountabilities of our public officials and public servants. But throughout this process, it was really important that our stakeholders and our community's voice be included and there's full engagement. So before we proceed to not only agenda item number 6, but 7, because it's very similar, I want to ask our Deputy City Attorney, Shen, to give us his legal opinion on the procedures and the timeline for such a ballot measure if we were to proceed for a June 2022 action. I think that it would be very helpful to have his opinion specifically on the timeline and the legal requirements as we have this discussion. So, Deputy City Attorney Shin, do you mind giving us your opinion?
Sure, no problem, Chair Lee. I'm not sure if I have a full-fledged opinion to share with you, but I'm happy to share some of the brief highlights. So the Ethics Commission has a relatively unique authority under the City Charter, Section 15.102, to submit ballot measures directly to the voters without any further action by any other city officials, such as the Board of Supervisors, the mayor. The Ethics Commission can submit these ballot measures by 4/5 vote of its members. And they have to, of course, be within the Ethics Commission's general jurisdiction, dealing with conflict of interest and gift laws, of course. In terms of timing for the submission of ballot measures, and I think the staff's memo already alluded to this, if you are targeting the June 22 election, the deadline for submitting these ballot measures to the voters would be 95 days beforehand, which would be roughly early March. So the Ethics Commission would have at least 2.5 more months to decide whether to submit these measures or to make further amendments or updates or tweaks to these measures before submitting them to the voters. Hopefully that answered your question, Chair Lee, but please let me know if there's any other questions that you have on your mind.
Okay, thank you very much. In light of colleagues, in light of the public comments that we heard earlier today, I have a couple of suggestions regarding actually 6 and 7. We can either table this, or we can continue to have the staff to make presentation and then hold off or not the decision. My personal preference is yes, there was over like 200 pages of documents that we, along with the public, had to review in such a very short time. And this is a very important process, the ballot measure. And I want to make sure that not only is this done correctly, but input is really important. But at the same time, this is on the agenda. And personally, I would want to at least hear the presentation from the staff, because this is not just going to be a one-up discussion. And it will take a couple more discussion to treat out what's in it and any comments, any amendments that the public may want us to consider. So if we have any comments, if we can have a discussion. No hands raised. So let's proceed with.
Actually, I can't figure out where my hand is. Where is it? So
I see you. Go ahead. Go ahead, Commissioner Bush.
I think that hearing a presentation now is worthwhile, because people have been told that this is an opportunity, and so they may have set time aside to come and give us their input. And I think that we need to be aware that the Board of Supervisors has a measure that mirrors this, I think is the term that's being used by our staff. And while that process is underway, and they already had one vote, which was unanimous on Tuesday of this week, and next week they will have a second reading, a second vote on it, and then it goes to the mayor. There is an advantage of having the board do something, because the board can be advocates for a measure, and we can't. We are precluded to some extent from going out and campaigning even on a measure that we put on the ballot. At least that's the experience we had when we did ballot measures in the past. So we would go and I, as a private person, could be an advocate, but the commission's own leadership was limited only to explaining what it was and how it got on the ballot, but they couldn't then urge an endorsement of it by various groups. So the point being that the Board of Supervisors can urge endorsements, and they can be advocates for a measure. In the past, our measures that were ethics reforms generated some opposition. And so there was a need for an actual campaign and raising money for it and all the rest of it. So far, we have not seen any public opposition at the board when this was taken up on Tuesday. And the people who have opposed it in the past appear to have a comfort level with the current version. It's not that I would say that the current version is complete in every respect of what I would like to see in something like this, but I do think that there is some advantage to Chair Lee's proposal of hearing it now and then perhaps deciding that we will act on it later, because it would give an opportunity for the other steps to be taken. But that doesn't preclude us at some point of adding material that we think would benefit and improve this product. So that's my comment.
Okay. Commissioner Bell and then Commissioner Chu.
Thank you, Chair Lee. Commissioner Bush. So Commissioner Bush's comments went beyond my, I would like to associate what I believe is the idea of hearing all of the substantive presentations today. City Attorney Shen has told us that we have until March. And what I am would be in favor of is letting everybody get their chits in. Our staff has done a lot of work on this. I'm sure that they feel very comfortable in their position. We've heard from two important institutions in the city and county of San Francisco that says, you know, we haven't had enough time to look at this yet. And it may be when they look at it, they agree with it. It may be when they look at it, they don't. But on something like this, I would want to make sure that we have a full hearing. Having been a lawyer that got a short amount of turnaround time to make an argument in my life, I am always in favor, as long as our deadlines can be met, of having a full hearing. So I like your, if I understand it correct, Chair Lee, let us hear all the information today. If the people that feel they need more time actually have some ideas that they want to put in the mix today, they can do that, but do a full hearing in January, and then vote on it January or February, as long as we are able to meet the deadline. So I'm hoping I was somewhat coherent in those remarks, but to summarize, basically hear all the, you know, as we used to say, hear the tis and the taint today about what we want, what there's opposition, get all of that substantive stuff out today from our staff, and then let us deliberate on it, give people more time to hear from us, to hear what they have to say, and then proceed accordingly. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bell. Commissioner Chu.
Sorry, trying to unmute. Commissioner Bell and Commissioner Bush articulated my thoughts exactly. So +1 to their comments.
Okay, so we are going to hear from Mr. Ford the full presentation, and I will also ask that now that we know the time schedule, the January meeting is coming up, and that would be scheduled. That will be in the agenda. But because it's a holiday season that we are dealing with, let's give ourselves more time, because I think it's really important for the staff to reach out to the stakeholders community as well as the broader interested party community to make sure that we have their comments, that they participate. If there are ample opportunities for them to participate, we hear them. And also this gives us the opportunity to tweet out maybe additional amendments to this too. We want to make sure that if we decide to put this on the ballot, this is something that is really worthy of the public's attention. So, Mr. Ford, if we can ask you to make the presentation for agenda item number 6, please.
Can Chair Lee,
Oh, sorry.
before you do that, can I ask one additional question? In
Please.
addition to the timing, we have to have 4 commissioners who put something on the ballot. And are we looking at a period where we are confident that we will have 4 commissioners? Because I don't know how long it's going to take the city attorney to fill the vacancy that's there. And I know that under normal circumstances, Commissioner Chu's term ends at the end of January. So we could be between a rock and a hard place when it comes to the number of commissioners who are available to vote on it.
Commissioner Lee, if I might, I had my hand up. You didn't see it. And Commissioner Bush is clairvoyant in this way. Similarly, for me, I would hope that in full transparency, that we might be able to address this meeting, finish this issue by the January meeting, because I similarly will be rotating off. There is a replacement for me, but since I will have heard all these arguments, I would want to participate in the decision about it before handing it over to a new commissioner. So I would love, and my advocacy was that we take the time, we hear this stuff today, but we vote on it in January.
Okay, that's sort of a surprise, Commissioner Bell. Maybe what we can do is let's aim for January. I think our meeting in January was, what date was it?
It's the 14th.
January 14th.
Two meetings as well in the event that this is insufficient time on the 14th. We also have a meeting on the 21st. It's a special meeting, but I believe we could add these items to that agenda for the 21st.
Commissioner Chu, is it possible for you to get closer to your mic? I'm having problems hearing you. I don't know if others are.
We have 2 meetings scheduled in January, one on the 14th, on the 21st. So in the event that we still have need more time, we could also calendar it on the 21st as well. And I believe my term ends in March, as I was appointed in April of 2016. So I have a couple more meetings. Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. So why don't we proceed with Mr. Ford's presentation, and then if we can encourage the staff to conduct their outreach ASAP to make sure that we have full engagement by the January 14th meeting, and if need be, definitely for the January 21st meeting to make sure that we have the full participation of Commissioner Bell. So with that, Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Chair Lee. Pat Ford, Senior Policy and Legislative Affairs Counsel. I'll talk just about item 6 right now, talk about item 7 on the next agenda item. I don't have a presentation on agenda item 6. This is something that we presented in November of last year about behested payments, and we've been working with the board for the last 13 months to move legislation on the behested payment recommendation. And as you've already discussed, I can happily report that the board unanimously passed legislation that's almost identical to the legislation that is attached to agenda item 6. And for that reason, I would recommend to you that you continue the discussion of this item until the January meeting so that you can see what action the board takes next week if they approve it again on the second reading, and then what action the mayor takes, if any, on that legislation. That would allow you to know in January where we stand and what behested payment rules will actually become law. At this point, the version that the board has passed is very strong. We support it. It, like I said, it largely lines up with exactly what's before you. It meets all of the terms of the commission's recommendation that the commission approved unanimously in November of last year. So I think you're in a very good position right now to wait and let that process play out. I'd definitely like to recognize Supervisor Haney and Monica Barnett in his office, and Supervisor Peskin and Lee Hepner in his office for their work on this, and also Deputy City Attorney Shen, who did a lot of work on various versions of this over the months. Also, Lee Hepner is here if you have any questions for him about the process on the board side. He's available and be glad to talk with you. But that's really all I have for you right now, is just to concur in that recommendation that you continue this until next month so you can see the legislative process play out.
Can you send us a the body of the legislation?
Yes, I'd be glad to do that.
Thank you. Commissioner Bell, your hands up. Unmute, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair Lee. I wanted to ask Mr. Ford, and once again, congratulate the staff on all the work that they've done and how forthcoming they've been. And I have just been involved in issuing a report to the City and County of San Francisco about closing the juvenile hall, and it was recommendations, but the board kept the power to implement it. So what I'm wondering here is, does the board's resolution, Mr. Ford, one of my concerns has been, like this notion of an unfunded mandate, that we could have this great, strong legislation in place that nobody knows about, or in fact have not been trained on, or, the issues that I have brought, forward in a boring way every time is this notion of, once we pass it, how is it that people learn what they're supposed to do? So is this kind of like a two-step process, Mr. Ford, in that the board's legislation mirrors ours or is close enough to ours that we feel comfortable and is strong? And does it address at all training and how it is that we're going to have knowledge transfer about this important piece of legislation?
Thank you, Commissioner Bell. So that legislation itself, just like the behested payment measure that's before you, does not address training on its own terms. That's when you get into agenda item 7, which when we get there, one of our recommendations that's in that measure is about ethics training. And that would cover behested payment rules. It would cover many, many ethics rules that apply to city officials. So yeah, I completely agree with you that training at this point is clearly needed. Way more people need to be getting trained on behested payments and all kinds of other things. But that's where that mandate would exist, is in that other measure.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Commissioner Chu.
Thank you, Chair Lee. I'd like to associate myself with Commissioner Bell's comments and also commend staff on stellar work here. I have, when we open to public comment, I have a question for Lee Hepner on the board side as to whether or not he, from his vantage point and what he knows today and has visibility into, expect any amendments to the ordinance as it currently stands. As per Mr. Ford's comments earlier, it sounds like the version before the board is very similar to what we had sent over, I might note, over a year ago to the board for their consideration. And so in January, Mr. Ford, if you could highlight for us if there are any discrepancies as to the finally approved version from the Board of Supervisors to the Ethics Commission version, which leads me to my second point, which is procedural in nature, but relating to approvals. So the origin of this legislation came out of a joint session with the Board of Supervisors and the Ethics Commission, requiring a supermajority vote of both bodies. So the Board of Supervisors, 8 out of 11, the supervisors had to approve it, and 4 out of the 5 Ethics Commission members had to approve it. This ordinance making amendments to that original piece of legislation does not require, as I understand, Ethics Commission approval. It can be approved by any changes to this ordinance can be approved by the simple majority vote of the Board of Supervisors. And for me, what I would like to see, and as I understand it, and would ask Deputy City Attorney Shen to confirm or clarify what the process would be in order for this ordinance, these changes to the ordinance, to have a provision that would require, any future changes to the behested payment ordinance or the gift ordinance to require a Board of Supervisor and Ethics Commission supermajority votes that would have to be submitted to the voters by ballot measure. And in the absence of that, any changes to either ordinance could be done by the Board of Supervisors by a simple majority vote. And I don't think that was certainly my position. Having voted on that legislation in 2018 was not my intention. That what took the supermajority of both bodies to approve can't be amended or undone by the simple majority vote of one. So I would like to make sure that both ordinances have the requirement that any changes still require the supermajority vote of both sides of both organizations, entities. But if Deputy City Attorney Shen, if you could cut through all of my ramblings and clarify for us what that process is, and see if I captured that correctly, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, if I'm happy to answer your question. So if I understand the issue that you've honed in on, I think it is that you want to enact legislation that could not be amended or undone, so to speak, by a simple majority vote of the Board of Supervisors. You would want to enact legislation that would require the supermajority vote approval of both the Ethics Commission and Board of Supervisors going forward.
Yes.
Okay. You are correct. That if that is the mechanism that you want to put in place, that legislation would need to be enacted through a ballot measure. Obviously, most ordinances don't have those supermajority vote requirements for further amendments. And then the only way we can do it is by enacting it as a voter-approved measure in the first instance, which is why many of the things we deal with here at the Ethics Commission does have that feature, is because a lot of the things that we have a jurisdiction over were first approved by the voters. So if I understand your direction, Commissioner Chu, even if the Ethics Commission is satisfied with the Board of Supervisors' final legislation of behested payments, you may still be interested in, I guess, readopting it as a ballot measure from the Ethics Commission to ensure that these supermajority vote approval requirements are in there going forward.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then, since I have the floor, could I just respond to one thing that Commissioner Bell said with Chair Lee's permission?
Please do.
Yeah, so I completely understood and heard Commissioner Bell's concern and interest in training and making sure that people understand these new rules of engagement. I would like to point out one thing about the legislation that's currently before the board. So right now it has kind of a standard operative date, which it would become operative essentially 30 days after the Board of Supervisors approves it, with some time for the mayor to approve the legislation as well. If you do want to provide a little bit more breathing room for education, outreach, the Ethics Commission trainings that Mr. Ford already referenced, we could put in a delayed operative date to just get a little more time for all of it to happen. Obviously, that kind of training and education outreach may take more than 30 days normally allowed for legislation. So we could provide a little bit more of a cushion if that's something the commission's interested in.
Thank you for that information. Very helpful.
Very helpful.
I also want to thank Attorney Shen, because I was thinking the same thing. A delayed implementation, even as late as 90 days, could be very helpful in getting education out on the whole thing.
Okay, let's open up for public comments.
Are we through with commissioner comments? I was commenting only on the implementation issue, but I have a number of questions about the
Okay.
measure itself.
Okay.
If it's okay to do that now.
Yes.
Okay, I'm just looking for clarification, not for amendments. But when we have interested parties defined in behested payments, it's pretty much down to someone who has business before a specific commission. So you cannot request a behested payment or make a behested payment at the request of somebody who's on planning, for example, if you have business before planning. But as I read it, you could ask somebody who's on one of the other commissions. For example, building inspection. And we know that things they migrate from commission to commission, depending what it is. It could go from planning to building inspection. It could go from parks and rec to the port commission, as it did in the last bond measure, and so on and so forth. So have we tied our hands when it comes to people who are serving on other commissions being requested, even though it's related to something in a first commission? That's not very articulate. I apologize for my...
I understood your question, Commissioner Bush. And yeah, the answer is that no, your hands are not tied. The law would cover that. So if a person were an interested person, or interested party rather, because they were seeking a permit from a department, they were a party to a proceeding for a permit before a department, and then that permit was referred to another department, and there was a proceeding at that other department, then that person would become an interested party vis-a-vis that second department. So as a matter moves to other departments, that person would become an interested party for those other departments. They would only not be an interested party for departments for which they have no matter pending before that department. So for example, in the hypo, a matter goes from planning to DBI, that person would be an interested party for individuals within those two departments, but for example, would not be an interested party for the Ethics Commission because they don't have any matter pending before the Ethics Commission.
So is there a time, like if they have a matter that is pending in the prior 30 or 60 days, or a post referral over, so that you capture a broader period of time than just the single date that something goes over?
Yes, and just specifically, we're talking about file 201132. This is the board legislation.
Yes.
The same provision is in the measure that's attached here to item 6, but just to be clear that we're talking about the board legislation. Yes, it has a 12-month period following the date on which the final decision was rendered in the proceeding. So the rule would apply during the period that the proceeding is going on, and then for 12 months after the final decision.
And does it apply to people who don't actually have a vote on a matter, but who have a significant role in setting the stage? So for example, Mohammed Nehru did not have a vote on rate setting. We had 3 city department heads who made up the rate committee. So they would have been covered because they had a matter pending before them. But would Nehru have been covered because he didn't have a matter pending? He only had a role making a recommendation that went to the rate setting committee.
Yeah, I think in that instance, we would have to look closely about whether or not that would constitute administrative proceeding before the Director of Public Works. It would depend on whether or not that would be considered an other entitlement for use. That would be the term there. But more importantly, I think that in that particular situation, that the company seeking the rate change would be considered someone who is attempting to influence the director of public works. And an attempt to influence is another way that somebody is considered an interested party. So yes, in that situation, that company would be an interested party for the director of public works.
That's a good point. Attempting to influence it sounds like it would cover most of what we're looking at. What about commissioners who are fundraisers, either on a volunteer basis or that's their profession? So let's call it the Charlotte Schultz exemption. That was a member of several commissions and who was extremely generous in making contributions to city projects that needed help. And she would sometimes ask other people to contribute as well. But she got no pay for any of that. It had no benefit to her other than the fact that the program she cared about would be better funded. And then you have others who make a living fundraising, sometimes for ballot measures, sometimes for campaigns against members of the board or for members of the board. How are they impacted by this? Because they may be fundraising from people who do not have matters before their group, but who obviously are relying on a city official to be their fundraiser.
Sure. So to your first question, there was an amendment to the legislation that creates an exception to the term interested party, which says that an individual who is an uncompensated board member of a nonprofit organization is not an interested party just because that organization is an interested party. So for example, if a nonprofit organization is a party to an agreement with a city department, maybe they're getting a grant from the city department, that would make that organization an interested party for anybody within that department. But what this exception is saying is that somebody who is volunteering to be on the board of that nonprofit is not an interested party just because of that relationship with that organization. For most instances, that would be something that makes you an interested party. For example, if you're on the board of a company and that company is a city contractor, the company is an interested party, the members of the board of directors of that company are an interested party. But this exception was inserted here to address the issue that you're describing, that there are commissioners and other people who serve on nonprofit boards, and there's a concern that it would be difficult for people who raise funds for nonprofits to do so if they have to simultaneously be cognizant of all of the different nonprofit boards that those individuals are on and whether or not those nonprofits are getting grants from the city. That would make it really difficult for people. So this exception was inserted to address that. Lee could talk to exactly the process behind that because he was the one who led that effort, but that's why that's there, to address that concern.
And for those who are professional fundraisers?
Yes, I think you were specifically talking about political contributions. This behested payment legislation doesn't touch that. Those are governed by California state law, Government Code Section 84308 has a rule about soliciting contributions from individuals who are parties or participants in proceedings before a government official. So that rule would apply there. And then also there are separate city laws about political activities by city officials and not soliciting political contributions from other city officials.
And finally, I don't remember if I've got the right form number, a form 803, I think it is, in which there's a provision that says that if you are serving on another group and a member of that group has business before you, you have to disclose that. In other words, if you're on the board of the library and you have somebody who's on the board of an outfit that contracts with the fire department, that you would have to disclose you had a relationship because you shared a position with that person who serves on several different groups. I'm making a complete hash of this, but you know what I'm talking about?
I do know what you're talking about. I think those are recent developments for the Form 803. The FPPC has recently enacted some new regulations on the form. I just checked the form on their website right now. They haven't incorporated that into the form. So right now, the Form 803, and for anybody who's not familiar with the Form 803, this is the California state form that's promulgated by the Fair Political Practices Commission. It's a requirement that applies to elected officials, state and local, who request behested payments, and those payments are $5,000 or more. They have to disclose the behested payment. The official has to disclose the behested payment on the Form 803. And right now, the Form 803 only asks for basic information about the official, who made the payment, who the payment went to, how much it was, when the date was, a brief description. It does not yet represent the kind of information that you're talking about, but I know that the FPPC has recently been taking some regulatory actions on their disclosure requirement for behested payments that I think does include some of the things that you're describing. They've recently also created new rules about donor advised funds and how those work with behested payment reporting. So I think that they may update that form, and I will keep a close watch on that, and I'll let you know if and when that happens.
So if we take this up in January, could you provide a brief memo on the state or federal requirements that impact how our people would operate, and whether, as you just said, that applies to elected officials, but apparently it does not apply to commissioners or department heads that are not elected. And so you would also identify gaps that would fall in before us from state and that we want to consider locally changing. I'm not suggesting that we make changes in the legislation or that we ask the board to review this. I'm just asking that when we take it up in January, we have a better understanding of what it is that that exists or is about to exist and how we fit into that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chu, your hands up.
Yes, thank you, Chair Lee. Mr. Ford, could you refresh us on what the consequences are under the proposed ordinance for failure to make required disclosures?
Yes, that would be subject to the same kind of penalties as other disclosures. So it could result in administrative penalties under the Ethics Commission's administrative penalty provision. And that would be all that the Ethics Commission would be pursuing, would be administrative penalties.
Okay, and then so I think the challenge becomes, if we think about enforcement, is that we don't know when someone has failed to make a disclosure, like because there's no way to have clarity or certainty or even visibility into what types of behested payments may or may not have been made in the absence of disclosure. So I'm wondering whether is there a mechanism by which, when perhaps it's Form 700 filers file or like make any sort of certification, they say that, you know, in this calendar year when I'm or you know, fiscal year, whatever the time period may be, you know, that I have under penalty of perjury made all the disclosures that I need to make, that I'm required to make under, you know, all the laws and regulations that may be applicable to me.
Of officials certifying that, I think that's something that we will want to include as part of any mandatory training that we have, that we're training officials and that they would be certifying that they complete that. And yeah, as to the disclosure requirements, I mean, We certainly don't need any kind of certification like that to penalize people for not filing disclosures. Just the failure to file them in and of itself is punishable. But yeah, we could definitely explore ways to make sure that people are aware of their filing disclosures outside of training. I think we send reminders, we have compliance materials. Yeah, I don't think that we've necessarily had people sign and return compliance materials before, but we could explore that.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it could be built into a work process or a workflow that already exists. So what I'm thinking about, the analogy I would draw is CEO and CFO of public companies need to swear under penalty of perjury that all of their securities filings that they're making on a quarterly and annual basis, are true and correct, right? And that they don't contain any, any statement of material fact or material omissions. And that this is a reminder to make sure it's like, oh yes, like I'm signing on the dotted line here that everything is true and correct, or I'm signing on the dotted line here to say that my financial disclosures on my Form 700 are correct, and that in addition, like I have also already made all the other required disclosures that I need to make, and so that would spur them to say, well, under behested payments, did I identify everything? Have I disclosed all gifts that I have received? And that it's not so much a catalyst or a mechanism for our enforcement, but a way to set a reminder for people who would be subject to these regulations to make sure that they double check before clicking the button.
Yeah, you know that we are hiring people to do the Ethics at Work program, and I think as that program gets staffed and gets up and running, I think they'll be looking at any and every possible method to remind people of what their ethics obligations are. So that's definitely one that we can talk about and discuss, or those folks can.
Great. And so, at a future date, I think it would be great after all the dust settles to have the engagement and compliance team come and provide an overview of how the rollout and the education and the training component will look on a go-forward basis to make sure that everyone knows their obligations under these new rules.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Chu. If there's no more Commissioner comments, let's go to public comments.
Madam Chair, we are checking to see if there are callers in the queue. For those already on hold, please continue to wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted. If you just joined this meeting, we are currently on the public discussion on the motion of agenda item 6, discussion and possible action on proposal regarding a possible June 2022 ballot measure to prohibit certain city officials from soliciting behested payments from interested parties. If you have not already done so, please press *3 to be added to the public comment queue. You will have 3 minutes to provide your public comment, 6 minutes if you're online with an interpreter. You will hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. Please stand by. Madam Chair, we have callers in the queue. Welcome, caller. Your 3 minutes begins now.
Hello, this is Lisa Pagan with the Office of Economic and Workforce Development. I'm calling on behalf of item number 6, and I'll wait for an item number 7. But we would like to request a continuance of this item. Specifically, we'd like more time to evaluate the ballot initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. I just want to reemphasize we will be taking this matter up in the January meetings. So today we have decided to just have the discussion, and then the action will be taken at a future meeting. Next caller, please.
Please stand by. Thank you, caller. Your 3 minutes begins now.
Good morning, Commissioners. This is Debbie Lerman at the Human Services Network. Our concern with this legislation has been the need to protect legitimate fundraising and the ability of nonprofit representatives to serve on city boards and commissioners while fulfilling their responsibilities to their organizations. And to be effective while protecting those activities, we feel the legislation must be balanced and targeted to those interested parties where corrupting influences are more likely to occur, and to ensure that the law is workable and enforceable. Today, we ask you to support the board's version of the legislation rather than going to the ballot. The Human Services Network worked with Supervisor Peskin's office to address our concerns. And with amendments, we believe that most have been addressed, and we are supportive of the legislation that passed the board unanimously on first reading on Tuesday. And we hope that our participation actually made this a better law. For example, we appreciate the exemption for uncompensated board members who have no financial interest in the organization or contract and are unlikely to be motivated by corruptive influence. The ethics database barring campaign contributions that covers nonprofit board members with contractors has over 33,000 entries. And that size of a database would make the behested contributions legislation nearly impossible to implement and enforce. Another problematic area was around the attempts to influence legislation. It originally included advocacy that may not involve direct contact with the public officials, even if the official isn't aware of the attempt to influence. That made no sense in a behested contributions piece of legislation. We believe that the threat of corruption is low for issue advocates who participate in protected First Amendment activities like going to rallies, public forums, signing petitions, or posting on social media. The definition was vague and overly broad, and the legislation potentially could have swept up thousands of people who merely expressed their opinion, but are not really interested parties with a financial interest of any kind. It would also have created gotcha moments for public officials. We haven't had a similar opportunity to review the Ethics Commission's proposed measure, which is similar, in order to prevent unintended consequences and allow for any necessary tweaks that may arise. We believe the best course is to support the board's version and refrain from going to the ballot. The Commission always retains the power to go to the ballot should there be future efforts to weaken the law. Thank you for considering our position.
Thank you, caller. Please stand by. Madam Chair, there are no further callers in the queue.
Okay, thank you. Public comment is closed. Since no action is required, this item will be continued to the January meeting. Item number 7, discussion and possible action and proposal regarding a possible June 2022 ballot, 2022 ballot measure and regulation amendment to enact recommendations contained in Report on Gift Laws, Part A, Gifts to Individuals, dated August 2nd, 2021, and Report on Gift Laws, Part B, Gifts to City of Departments, dated September 29, 2021, and the report to strengthen essential ethics provisions dated December 6, 2021. Colleagues, this applies the same to agenda item number 6, which is possible action will be deferred to a future meeting, but we will have a discussion presentation from Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Chair Lee. Sorry, I got muted there. I have a slide deck that I'll show you as I talk about this item. Great, I just got presenter authority. Thank you. Chair Lee, can you see this now?
Yes.
Great. So agenda item 7 is a report and has legislation attached to it and a set of draft regulation amendments. This report is the third phase in the Commission's year-and-a-half-long project to review the city's ethics laws. This project was spurred by the federal corruption probe that, as you mentioned earlier, Chair Lee, that started almost 2 years ago. That was January of 2020. And this project kicked off shortly after that. So the overarching goal of this project is to learn from what we know from those federal corruption probes and to make sure that our city's ethics laws and programs are strong enough to make sure that similar conduct like that does not happen in the future, and to start rebuilding the public's trust in city government and to build the right tone at the top when it comes to ethics. I'll give a quick review of the status and progress of this report so you can see the larger context. The first phase of this project we just talked about under agenda item 6, that was about behested payments. That report was delivered to the Commission in November of 2020. And as I mentioned, under agenda item 6, there's a ballot measure that would enact the Commission's recommendation about behested payments. But as we discussed, the file at the board, which has been approved on the first reading, is largely identical to that, and at this point seems to be the most promising way forward for that legislation to become enacted. The second phase of the project is about gifts. And this phase is actually broken into 2 reports. One that was delivered in August of this year that focuses on gifts to individuals, and one that was delivered in October of this year that focuses on gifts that are made through city departments. The last phase of this project is about what we're calling essential ethics provisions. These are provisions that are fundamental to the overall effectiveness of the city's ethics laws. And this is the report that is before you today and that I will run through with you. And the ballot measure that is attached to agenda item 7 would enact the recommendations of both phase 2 and phase 3. So it's about gifts, and it's also about these fundamental ethics provisions. And before I move on, I should also talk a little bit while we're looking at this timeline about the engagement that happened with stakeholders as part of this project. And that will also help give some context about why we recommend at this point that the Commission hold off until January to consider this. And I guess we should start in April. There were interested persons meetings back in April about gifts. We had 2 meetings that were well attended where we talked about gifts to individuals and gifts that are made through city departments. And then the Commission, as you see on the timeline, discussed gifts at both the August and October meetings. And as you remember, in October, you did receive a letter from the arts museums, and Mr. Calden of the War Memorial appeared at that meeting, and you had an extended discussion with him. So those departments have been part of this process. Then on October 26th, we sent out a questionnaire to every department head in the city about the phase 3 topics. We sent out another reminder on November 4th to the department heads that we hadn't heard back from yet. We ended up with about 75% of department heads responding to us. So we've heard from, I think that's 42 department heads or staff members that they designated to complete that questionnaire. And we had IP meetings on November 16th and November 18th that included multiple city departments that were present there. Then we also affirmatively reached out to 7 departments to set up one-on-one meetings with them to talk about their statements of incompatible activities and their programs for disclosing personal, professional, and business relationships with people who have business before their department. So we feel like the information we got from the departments was a really important part of this project. It helped guide a lot of our recommendations, and we're really grateful for those departments that engaged with us. We found their comments to be really insightful and very helpful. So a bit about background. I mentioned this on the very first slide, but I think it bears keeping in mind why we're here today having this conversation. At this point, the Department of Justice has charged 13 individuals, including 2 city department heads and 2 city employees, with crimes of corruption. 8 individuals, including 1 city employee, have agreed to plead guilty to those charges. And in addition, the San Francisco District Attorney has brought corruption charges against 1 individual who is a former DPW employee. In total, 7 city officers and employees have resigned or been terminated as a result of this corruption investigation. So now I will talk about what's in the Phase 3 report. So as I mentioned, the 3rd phase focuses on fundamental provisions of the city's ethics laws. These are provisions that are essential to the overall effectiveness of the laws, whereas Phase 1 looked specifically at behested payments, a very specific kind of ethical issue. Phase 2 looked at gifts, both to individuals and through departments, again, a specific kind of ethical issue. Phase 3 looks more broadly at what are the basic provisions in the code that need to be very strong in order for behested payment, gift, and all other laws to be effective in practice. Our recommendation through Phase 3 is that there is a package of reforms that would strengthen these essential provisions. And as you know, we recommend that take the form of a ballot measure. The main thrust of these recommendations are, 1, to adapt the laws to make them more effective. We've learned a lot over the last year and a half about things that are happening in and around city government. And it's crucial that ethics laws learn from those experiences, that they adapt over time. This is a big reason why the city has an ethics commission and has a department to support the commission so that we can study these issues, make sure that our laws are timely and effective. Also, to borrow a phrase from the controller that I think is very appropriate, it's important to build a better tone at the top. And the best way to do that is through education and compliance resources. So you'll see as I get through this that there's a big education component to this. Additionally, we think it's important to create consistency across ethics laws. There are 10 chapters to the code, and there are differences between those chapters that are, in some ways, are problematic. And by creating better consistency, we would be strengthening the laws and make them more effective. It's also important to strengthen enforcement. And I think this maybe underlies all these other points, that ethics laws are strong if they carry clear consequences. And that's something that can also be communicated clearly through education, that you must follow ethics rules because there are consequences if you don't. So this is the first recommendation as part of this phase, is to strengthen the city's bribery law. And we have 3 specific ways that the law should be strengthened. 1 is that a bribe should be considered anything of value that's given with the intent to influence an official action. Right now, the law is phrased very narrowly, that only something that constitutes a gift under the law can be a bribe. There are a number of problems with this. The big one is that gift is a term of art. It's a defined term. There are exceptions to it, and that's really not what you normally see in a bribery rule. We closely looked at the federal bribery rules that several individuals in the city were charged with, including the 2 executives at Recology that are accused of bribing Mohammed Nuru. That law is much broader and much stronger than San Francisco's bribery rule. And this is one of the ways that it's broader. The federal law uses, I can't remember if it's the term anything of value or if they have a different term, but it's the same concept, that essentially anything that you I think they use the word payment. Any payment that you make with the intent to influence an official is a bribe. They do not limit it to the concept of something being a gift to the individual. Second recommendation is to prohibit bribery in cases where the payment is made to a third party, not the official in question. And again, this is an aspect of the federal bribery law that we do not have in our city's bribery law. So case in point, the Recology executives did not make payments directly to Mohammed Nuru. They allegedly made them to Parks Alliance with the intent that those payments would influence Nuru. In the eyes of the Department of Justice, that is still a bribe under federal law. And this is an aspect of bribery that we should also be prohibiting under local law. And third, the federal law prohibits the solicitation of bribes. However, our local law does not. And again, these are ways to bring our law more in line with federal bribery law, which is much stronger. And I think as we look at the various reasons of why a federal corruption probe happened in San Francisco, part of the answer to that is we need to have stronger laws that are just as effective as those federal laws that the Department of Justice is using. The second recommendation in this phase is to create a penalty for the failure to disclose personal and professional relationships. So this is already a disclosure requirement under city law. It essentially requires city officers and employees to disclose on the record if they have a personal, professional, or business relationship with an individual who is the subject of a decision that is being made by that officer or employee. And those terms are defined in the Ethics Commission's regulations, what constitutes a personal relationship, a professional relationship, and a business relationship. However, there's a very unique exception to this disclosure requirement, which says, other than a court potentially reversing the decision that was made, if the disclosure was not properly made, there's no penalty for the official who failed to make the disclosure. That's a fairly unique aspect of this disclosure. You really don't see that in other ethics disclosures. Almost every other, potentially every other disclosure requirement under our law carries a penalty if you fail to comply with your legal obligation. This one does not. And part of what we did as the research for this project, as you know from reading the report, is we reached out to city departments through that questionnaire that I mentioned earlier. And we asked them to share all of their disclosures with us that were made under this disclosure requirement. And we asked them to describe their process that they have for receiving, storing, and making available to the public any disclosures that they receive from officials within their departments. And we found a pretty small number of disclosures, and we found a lot of variety between departments in terms of how they implement this disclosure requirement in practice. So our main recommendation, which you see on this slide, is that there needs to be a penalty. There needs to be a consequence. So as we build that Ethics at Work program and we ramp up our communications with city employees and city officers about their requirements, such as this one, we can tell them, just like every other disclosure, if you don't make this one, you could potentially become subject to penalties. We think it's really important that there's a consequence. Another recommendation that we make in the report is that through regulation or through other kinds of guidance that the Ethics Commission provide guidance to departments about how they should be administering this program. That there should be some kind of standard protocols about how you receive the disclosures, where you store them, for how long, how you make them available to the public. It's something that the public should have much easier access to than they do right now. Third requirement in this report is to extend ethics training to all Form 700 filers. Right now, the law only requires annual ethics training for elected officials, commissioners, and department heads. However, Form 700 filers are individuals who participate in making government decisions. That's what makes someone have to file a Form 700. We think that it's important that ethics training not be limited just to the officers that currently receive mandatory ethics training, but that additionally, the city employees who are participating in making government decisions also be required to complete that same ethics training. And this would be, again, something that we would be doing through that Ethics at Work program. This would be the underlying statutory mandate that ensures that officials will be participating in that new program. fourth recommendation is to codify the rules on incompatible activities. Under city law, departments are required to adopt what's called a Statement of Incompatible Activities, or an SIA. 54 city departments currently have an SIA in place. And we did a close review of all 54 SIAs. We also reached out, as I mentioned, to every department head to try and engage with each department on how they implement the Statement of Incompatible Activities in practice, how it works in their department. And we found, for one, that the SIAs contain important ethics rules. There are some principles in here that are of vital importance. As you know from previous enforcement actions, we do bring enforcement actions against individuals who violate the terms of their Statement of Incompatible Activities. And they are really important rules to have in place. However, we found some major issues with the SIA program. I'll call it a program, this idea of having departments have their own statements in place. One big problem is that SIAs exclude most ethics rules. They only include a very narrow slice of the total universe of ethics rules. And I'll talk about what those rules are on a later slide, but really important rules like conflicts of interest, not taking action on items in which you personally have a financial interest and the decision will materially impact that financial interest, not discussed in SIAs. Rules on bribery, not discussed. Rules on disclosing personal relationships are not discussed. Form 700 filing, not part of an SIA. So many foundational ethics rules that people really need to know about are not in the SIAs. But what we learned from engaging with departments is that people sometimes will use the SIA as a shorthand summary of ethics rules, which of course it is not. It is not comprehensive. People should not be relying on it as their sole ethics compliance guide. So that's one problem. Another is that SIAs vary slightly between departments. After we reviewed all the SIAs, we found that they're nearly identical. They all have the same basic rules in them. There was actually a template that was created back in 2005 that departments used when they were creating their statements of incompatible activities, and they largely just repeated the exact template with maybe a few tweaks here and there. So that's good in terms of the rules are clear in terms of which ones are in the SIAs. However, those variations create issues. For one, it creates inconsistent rules between departments. So people in different departments might have slightly different rules that apply to them. And also departments for a few of the rules in the SIAs are able to issue what's called an advanced written determination, an AWD. And we also asked departments to share AWDs with us, and we reviewed all the AWDs that were shared. And we found that departments do not consistently apply the rules either through the AWD process. So there's a good degree of inconsistency between departments in terms of what the rules are and in terms of how they're being applied to individuals within those departments. Another problem with inconsistency is that it leads to a lack of awareness and visibility of the SIA rules. Because of the differences between the rules, between the different departments, it becomes really difficult to include SIA rules in trainings or compliance materials that are going to be used citywide. You always have to remind people, in addition, please check your SIA. You need to look there for more rules. You can't put every department's rules in those citywide resources. A lot of people then do not actually turn to the SIA and review the SIA. They tend to be somewhat long. They can be 7 to 10 pages long. There's a lot of prefatory material. It's not until page 3 that you actually get to the rules that apply to someone, and the rules are very long. They're often big paragraphs that give kind of different iterations of the rule. And we've gotten a lot of feedback from people that they're very hard to read, hard to understand. So it's not a very accessible document. And then when it becomes hard to insert that material into compliance materials and training resources, then that makes it all the harder for people to become aware of what these rules require of them. So I mentioned earlier that for a few of the rules, not all, in the SIAs, individuals are able to request advanced written determinations from their departments. That should not be the case for certain of these rules. It should still be the case for the rules about excessive time demands. That's something that the departments should be judging. But when it comes to the rules against activities that are subject to your department's review, or providing selective assistance to individuals who are trying to do business with your department and not providing that same assistance to others, those are not rules that the departments should be able to waive for people. They should be standard rules that apply the same to everybody within a department and everybody across departments too. And in addition to codifying the rules in the SIAs, we think it's important to create a short summary of the laws that would be used as a compliance tool. So as I mentioned, there's a real need out there for people to have a short compliance document. And unfortunately, a lot of people are relying on the SIAs for that, which they shouldn't be doing since they're not comprehensive. So instead, to fill that need, we're recommending that the Ethics Commission create such a short summary, distribute it to departments each year, and then have departments use that as a compliance tool internally. So as I mentioned, we're recommending that the rules in the SIAs be codified, that they be placed directly into the Campaign and Governmental Conduct Code, just like all the other cities' ethics laws. This wouldn't change how those rules are enforced. You can already be subject to a penalty for violating SIA rules, as I mentioned. And as you remember, we've had those recently. But it would standardize the rules. They would become the same for everybody across the city, which would elevate them and start to build shared citywide understanding, just like we do for all of our other ethics laws. It would also simplify them, and it would allow the Ethics Commission to start including them in compliance resources, giving advice that applies universally to all departments, et cetera. And these are the 9 rules that we derived from the SIAs. Sometimes we copied them verbatim from the SIAs. Sometimes we had to derive what was kind of the common denominator between departments when there were slight variations. In some instances, we tweaked them a little bit to make them match language in the rest of the code or make them work better in conjunction with existing rules. But these essentially match the basic rules that are in the SIAs. And I won't go through each of them individually, but I think the names of the rules are pretty clear. These are generally fairly straightforward principles. I mean, the upshot is they instruct people how to not engage in activities outside of city service that either compromise their ability to be unbiased or in some way misuse city resources or the authority of city office for personal gain. And they address different aspects of that. So the first one, I'll just mention activities that are subject to the department's jurisdiction. That's a really important one that appears in a lot of departments' SIAs. And it's important to just note that departments would no longer need or have their own SIAs once these rules were to be codified. Those SIAs would no longer be necessary. So the last recommendation has a few parts to it, but the gist of it is to strengthen and harmonize basic provisions of the code. So these are not rules. These are not ethics rules that say do or don't do something or disclose something. These are provisions that allow other ethics rules to be administered and enforced. The first one is to standardize the penalty provisions throughout the code. It's important to note that the charter directly confers penalty authority on the commission. The charter says the Ethics Commission may issue monetary penalties for violations of the code or of the charter, of the ethics provisions in the charter. So the Ethics Commission already does have the power to impose penalties for any code violations. But in addition to that, what you see within all but one chapter of the code, and there are 10 chapters of the Campaign and Governmental Conduct Code, you see almost all chapters additionally have a statute, a code section within them that reiterate that violations of this chapter can result in penalties. And they don't just talk about administrative penalties, they also talk about civil and criminal penalties as well. However, those provisions are not the same throughout all of the chapters. And there's two issues that we think it's important to rectify. One is that there are 3 chapters of the code that attach a knowing or negligent mental state requirement in order for administrative penalties to be applied. Usually that kind of mental state requirement is only required for civil penalties, but in these 3 chapters, the lobbyist rules, permit consultant, also known as permit expediter rules, and major developer rules, it has to be shown that the person knowingly or negligently violated the law in order for administrative penalties to be applied. And that's really different than the other chapters. By and large, violations are punishable with administrative penalties on a strict liability basis. There's no need to show that the person violated the law in a certain way or with a certain mental state or intent, just that they were required to file something and they didn't file it. That's enough for a penalty to be imposed. These are largely disclosure regimes, these 3 chapters. So I think it's important that if these types of people who generally are paying money in order to influence city government, that if they are failing to disclose that they should be subject to penalties. Another change that we think is important to make is to add language that just clarifies in Article 3, Chapter 1, which that contains the rules about Form 700 filing, that people who fail to file the Form 700 as required under the law are in fact subject to penalties. There's no language right now in that chapter that says that, although, as I mentioned, the charter does confer that authority, and the commission has issued penalties in the past to individuals for failure to file the Form 700. And also, as I mentioned on a previous slide, the district attorney's office has brought criminal charges under the Campaign and Governmental Conduct Code against a former city employee who failed to file the Form 700, and in other instances who failed to disclose reportable financial interests. So I think it's important, just from a compliance perspective, to really make it clear to people who are subject to this that if they don't file the form as required, that they can be subject to consequences. And it's important just to note that this is really vital for effective enforcement.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Who can impose these penalties? Can the Ethics Commission impose any of them, or are they all at the department level?
Oh, this is for Ethics Commission imposing administrative penalties through our administrative enforcement process.
So I know in some cases, commissioners have been found to be in violation, but ethics couldn't act on it. It had to be done by the appointing authority. And the appointing authority chose not to act. Nothing happened. Are there gaps like that in these days?
Yeah, I would have to talk to you about what specific issues you're talking about. I mean, these penalty provisions essentially say that failure to follow the terms of these statutes within these chapters is punishable with the full administrative penalty authority under the charter, which the charter says the commission can impose monetary penalties of up to $5,000. So that's what it empowers the commission to do.
If I may, I think Commissioner Bush is referring to the penalties for failure to file the Form 700, which are, I think it caps out, maxes out at $100. I could be misremembering this, and
that's correct.
That that beyond issuing the fine, the penalty for $100, there was no other mechanism for the Ethics Commission to compel the filer to actually file or to prevent them from taking votes. So, Mr. Ford, could you either speak to that or include some provisions in the ordinance to address that gap?
Yeah, so the $100 limit is on late fees.
Okay, I see, on late fees. Okay.
And that's a creature of state law. State law sets the late fees, so those are capped at $100. This would not change that late fee, since that's a state law provision. This would just change, well, it really wouldn't change anything. It provides just notice that the commission can and will impose penalties for failure to file the Form 700 or failure to disclose reportable interests on it, which the commission has already imposed those kinds of penalties in the past, and this just makes it clearer to people that it's possible.
So do we have a rubric for imposing penalties for failing to file and for, at the city level?
We do, yeah, through the streamlined administrative resolution process. That has guidelines about when somebody can be eligible for that program and what kinds of penalties they can have. Those are reduced penalties for people who, I won't go through all of the eligibility criteria, but essentially for people who cooperate with the enforcement division and fix the problems that they have in their Form 700, then they're eligible for a reduced penalty.
I see. Okay.
In some cases, though, I recall the commission wanted to sanction a commissioner, not an ethics commissioner, for abuse of the public. There's a requirement that in conducting meetings, you allow people to speak and so on and so forth. And instead, in at least one instance, there was a threat of bodily harm. And that was then taken seriously enough by the commission that they referred it on to the appointing authority. And there was no response. So a month later, they referred it over again. And again, there was no response. Essentially, the appointing authority was allowing the clock to run out, which would take more than a year. And there was nothing that could be done. Does the situation exist now with this, that nothing can be done?
Yeah, I think what you're describing, kind of, denying individuals the ability to participate in public meetings, not something that traditionally would be covered under ethics laws, which are usually focusing more on conflicts of interest. I'm not aware of a rule within our code that talks about commissioners denying the right to individuals to participate. I think it's probably something that's more closely addressed by the Sunshine Ordinance or state law about public meetings like the Brown Act. I'd probably want to check in with the city attorney's office about what kind of rules exist around that, but it's not something that we looked at as part of this project. We were trying to look at what are the basic provisions in our code that enable our code to work well in practice. So yeah, we did not look at that issue.
Okay, thank you.
For the January meeting, could you come back, Mr. Ford, with a recommendation? Because there have been instances, and certainly since on my tenure here, that every year there are always a handful of commissioners or Form 700 filers who have failed to file, are late filing, and yet continue to participate and take votes in their role as an elected or an appointed, and I think that's really problematic.
Yeah, so this recommendation would actually add language to that code section in particular that says if you fail to comply with the disqualification requirement that you are subject to penalties. So if that was not already clear to people, this language should make it clear.
Okay, subject to penalties, but not prevented from voting or required to recuse themselves.
They are required to recuse themselves under the law, and if they fail to do that, they're subject to penalties.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. And when I get to the end too, and I talk a little bit about why at this point we're recommending that the commission continue this item until January, I can also talk about issues around adding more elements to this project right now.
Mr. Ford, to follow up on Commissioner Chu's question, my understanding is it's up to the particular commission to prevent a commissioner from voting, right? If that person has not filed the 700, so the responsibility is not on us, but it's on the particular department, which goes back to the training that we provide to make sure the leadership of these departments understand the responsibilities in carrying out these enforcement, right? Even though it's not us directly holding them accountable. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's an important point to underscore why we are recommending that the existing ethics training requirement be extended to city employees as well as officials, because that, the kind of situation you're describing, a commissioner is already required to do ethics training, but an employee within the department who's not the department head is not under law required to complete training. And we think that it's important to require more individuals to do training to kind of help with the sort of thing that you're describing, that they would understand ethics laws more fully, and they would be able to help city officers follow ethics rules in a situation like that. If they had already been trained on that requirement, they'd be able to more easily identify when a problem is happening. They could develop practices that are built on top of their new and better understanding of ethics rules, like checking to make sure that their commissioners have filed their Form 700 before they go into a meeting, so that they could remind those commissioners. It's hard to encourage people to build those kind of practices when city employees are not already required to do ethics training. So yeah, I completely agree with your point. And I think as we start to build that Ethics at Work project and start to engage new audiences with mandatory ethics training, if the commission decides to move forward with this, that can be the kind of forum where we talk to people about, hey, if you're involved in setting up your commission's meeting, here's an important rule that you need to be aware of, that before commissioners vote, they need to have filed their Form 700. And what should you do if you encounter a situation where a commissioner has not filed the Form 700, but they appear prepared to sit at the meeting and vote? That would be the forum for us to be helping people think through those issues, anticipate them, and set up practices for how to deal with that.
And I would imagine that would include training to whether it's commission secretaries and executive directors of the other requirements that the commissioners have to declare if someone appears before the commission meeting. If they happen to have a personal relationship, by law they are supposed to declare it, even though there may not be any other conflicts, right? So if someone comes before us and I happen to know somebody, I would need to say at the meeting that I just want to make sure that I know this person from whatever. So that is required under ethics rules of the commissioners to disclose. But I gather is not practiced much. So that should be included in the training of the executive team or the commission secretaries, because sometimes commissioners forget.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That rule will definitely be a part of that training that people get. We think that's going to be, along with creating a consequence for failure to do the disclosure, we think that training people, communicating with them about it, is going to be another major step towards actually seeing this get used in practice. So the second recommendation that we've made that supports this idea of strengthening and harmonizing basic provisions of the code relates to how legislative amendments are made to the code. I want to distinguish between legislative amendments and amendments that are made by the voters through the ballot measure process. Voters can amend the campaign and governmental conduct code by bringing a citizens initiative by gathering petitions, placing a measure on the ballot and voting on it, or they can vote on a measure that was placed on the ballot either by the Ethics Commission, as the Ethics Commission can do under the charter, or by the Board of Supervisors, as that body can do under the charter. And that's not what we're talking about here. That power of the citizens to amend the code exists under the charter, and this doesn't address that at all. What this addresses is legislative amendments, the ability of the Board of Supervisors as the legislature of the city and county to amend the campaign and governmental conduct code. There's already been some discussions about this already at this meeting, so I think it ties well into this item. So for the main chapters of our code, for the campaign finance chapters, the conflict of interest chapters, and the lobbyist chapter, there is a double supermajority requirement that both the Ethics Commission and the Board of Supervisors must approve any legislative amendments to those chapters. And that's a really important safeguard to have. It's very important to involve the Ethics Commission in those amendments to make sure that the commission that is charged with administering and enforcing those rules has a voice in any legislative amendments. And also to make sure that there's a really high bar that's set for any changes that are made without the involvement of the voters. Because again, this is just legislative amendments. However, there are a number of chapters in the code that do not have that kind of supermajority requirement, where both the Ethics Commission and the Board of Supervisors have to approve legislative amendments with a supermajority. And we think it's important to harmonize all the chapters such that each chapter requires that same kind of double supermajority requirement for legislative amendments. So that would require a change to Article 3, Chapter 3, which is a very short chapter that just talks about some duties of the Ethics Commission. There aren't really any ethics rules in that chapter. But more importantly, the chapters regarding permit consultants, major developers, and whistleblower protection. And I did not add it on this list, but also Article 3, Chapter 6, which contains the city's laws about behested payments. As Commissioner Chu raised earlier and Deputy City Attorney Shen confirmed, that chapter also lacks the double supermajority requirement. The Board of Supervisors is able to amend that chapter through its regular legislative process, which involves a simple majority of the board and signature by the mayor. So we would also support that chapter, the rules in that chapter also being subject to that. However, since we had a separate agenda item on the behested payment rules that would separately have addressed that, we didn't include it here, but as Commissioner Chu requested, we will work towards a solution to accomplishing that through this project when we come back before you in January. So we will include Article 3, Chapter 6 in this list when we come back. So as I mentioned, these chapters are not adequately protected from legislative amendments, which don't get approved by the voters. And it's important that the Ethics Commission be involved in the legislative process and that the Ethics Commission's approval be required for those changes. Another way that legislative amendments should be changed is to begin allowing for any legislative amendments to Article 1, Chapter 5 about campaign consultants. Right now, no legislative amendments are possible. That's because those laws were created through the ballot measure process, and no language was included at that time that authorizes legislative amendments to happen. Because that language isn't there, no legislative amendments are allowed. Only the voters through the ballot measure process can amend that chapter. And because of that, it's been many years since that chapter has been changed. It can't be amended in any way. So even if the commission wanted to do a policy project to review campaign consultant laws and wanted to move forward with legislation in partnership with the board, that couldn't happen. Only if it was sent to the voters would that be possible. And that would be even if there were very small clarifying or updating changes that maybe weren't appropriate for a ballot measure, that would still require a ballot measure to accomplish that. So we're recommending that this chapter be harmonized with the others and allow for legislative amendments, but again, only if a supermajority of both the Ethics Commission and the Board of Supervisors is attained for those amendments. So it's still a very high bar that would ensure a very thorough process and a high level of consensus in order for that chapter to be changed legislatively. So our last recommendation, which again talks about strengthening and harmonizing the basic provisions in the code, is to standardize the e-filing provisions in the code. And these are the provisions that say that the Ethics Commission can require public disclosures to be filed in an electronic format. This recommendation specifically is to add a general e-filing provision to 4 chapters that don't have one right now. What you see if you look throughout the code, throughout the different chapters, is that a lot of disclosure requirements will have e-filing language directly attached to them. It will say, you have to file this and the Ethics Commission can require that it be filed electronically. Some chapters lack a general provision that says the Ethics Commission can require any disclosures in this chapter to be filed electronically. As a matter of practice, we already have almost all of our filings, which is over 100, that are required to be filed electronically. So this would not be a big change in terms of current practice right now. We are working towards closing that last little gap so we can get to 100% mandatory e-filing for all of our filings. But what this would do is, again, clarify for people who are looking at the code that e-filing can be required for any provision, and also ensure that if future disclosures were to be added in the future and that specific e-filing language was not added to that new code section, that would be okay, that there would be a standard chapter-wide provision that could be relied on to require e-filing. And e-filing is just all around a really good thing and important in this century to have access online to public information. And also the vast majority of filers really prefer to file electronically rather than printing out a paper form, filling it out, signing it, and mailing it in or delivering it by hand to the Ethics Commission. So this just further supports that already very important part of our work and make sure that we'll continue into the future. So those are all the recommendations that are in the Phase 3 report. But also I wanted to just quickly recap the Phase 2 recommendations, since as I mentioned, the ballot measure that's attached here includes both the Phase 2 and the Phase 3 recommendations. So I'll just really quickly remind you what those are, but as you know, you saw those at November meeting. You've seen this legislation before, so you saw the draft Phase 2 ordinance and the draft Phase 2 regulation amendments in November. But the main point of Phase 2 is to reform the city's gift laws, in particular reform the gift exceptions and make sure that there aren't loopholes that are intended for the purposes of the city's gift laws. Create a definition of a gift under San Francisco law. Limit the exceptions that apply to only the ones that make sense for the restricted source rule. Prohibit gifts through departments and other intermediaries, which undermines the rule and serves as a workaround. Also to expand the restricted source rule to account for these practices. Make sure that people are not working around the restricted source rule through intermediaries. And lastly, to create a disclosure of gifts to city departments. Right now, there are 3 disclosures for gifts to city departments, none of which provides adequate transparency into those gifts. So instead, we're recommending a single centralized disclosure that would replace those 3, that would include all the information that is included on them and would be able to supplant those existing disclosures. It would be an electronic disclosure, and it would be something that the public would be able to have much easier access to. It's very difficult to access the existing 3 disclosures. And just to remind you of why it's important to talk about gifts through city departments, you'll remember this diagram from the report that we delivered in October about how the restricted source rule is being undermined by gifts that flow through city departments or gifts that flow through non-city entities in coordination with city departments. It's also something that the Controller's Office has studied and made recommendations about, and it's an important aspect of that gift legislation that you saw in November and that you discussed in October as well. And just to reiterate those findings that when the restricted source rule is undermined, that creates a danger and the appearance of pay to play and undue influence, even if those practices are not currently violations of current law. They ought to be because of these serious ethical issues that they create. And to reiterate why we're recommending a ballot measure at this point, the recommendations in phases 2 and 3 are very important. If the commission agrees and decides to approve them, the commission should seek the most expeditious way of enacting these reforms without any delay. We've done extensive stakeholder engagement, and as we've already talked about, we will do more stakeholder engagement in the next month to make sure that any final touches on this can be done, and we can hear any comments that we haven't already heard through the 45 departments that we reached out to engage with, the IP meetings that we've done, the meet and confer process that we did through DHR. We will continue to do that work to make sure that if there are any comments that folks have not shared with us yet, that they continue to have that opportunity to do so. Also, it's important to remember, as Deputy City Attorney Shen pointed out, that the amendments that change how legislative amendments can be done to the code, those can only be enacted through voter approved measure. So only by placing this measure on the ballot can the commission seek to change those legislative amendment provisions. If you go the legislative route, those would have to come out. Also, a ballot measure is a way to engage the voters in this process, the process of improving ethics and rebuilding trust. Obviously, we're dealing with a major issue right now of public trust, as the public for the last 2 years has seen several city department heads and high-level employees be the subject of criminal investigations, be arrested. Others have resigned, even if they weren't charged. People are doubting the integrity of city processes. This is one of the biggest, most important things we can achieve through this project, and engaging the voters through a ballot measure is one way to have them be included and to have them participate in this process and rebuild that trust. Also, just a quick reminder that there are also regulation amendments that are attached, and these would do two main things. They would reform the local gift exceptions, in particular about the restricted source rule, to better achieve the purposes of that rule. It would also clarify the subordinate gift rule exceptions. And these are freestanding from the measure. They can be enacted without the measure being approved. However, they would also provide clarity and support to the measure if it were to be approved. But it is something that can stand on its own. And this is the last slide. I always just close with this one to remind you of this important part of the findings and purpose of the government ethics ordinance, that government decisions should appear to be made on a fair and impartial basis. And before I turn it back over, I'll just back up and mention exactly why we are proposing at this point, even before this meeting started, that the commission wait until January, which is that we believe that the meet and confer process on this had been completed. We shared the recommendations, including the draft of this measure with DHR, who then shared it with the city's bargaining units on November 10th. We had a one-on-one meeting with the Municipal Executives Association, that's MEA, on November 17th. MEA represents most city department heads and other high-level city managers. We hadn't heard any feedback from MEA at that meeting or since then. That was about 3.5 weeks ago. We believe the process was completed. That's why we agendized this item for action for you today. However, we did find out late yesterday afternoon that MEA has requested that the meet and confer process be extended, that they do have some feedback, although they have not shared any feedback with us to date. They do have some feedback that they would like to share. So that process will continue, and we will be meeting with MEA next week. So that's why we're recommending that you wait until January. And then you're on the same page, obviously. You'd like that to continue as well. So that's great. But I wanted to make sure that you were aware of that development as well. So that concludes what I wanted to present to you, and I'm glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Do we have any comments from my fellow commissioners? Otherwise, we'll open up for public comment. Commissioner Bush.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Ford. It was very detailed and informative. I wonder if you could provide us with a chart or other summary of the comments that you got back from the 45 departments. I know you've incorporated them in your presentation, but it'd be good to see which departments made what kind of comments. Thank you.
Commissioner Bell. Unmute, please.
Thank you, Chair Lee. Sorry. I just want to say to the staff that this seems really comprehensive. I'm sure it took a tremendous amount of work. There's a lot of detail. And also, I'm sure that there's, strategy as well. So I just appreciate all the work. And especially the first slides, which talk about the arc of sections 1, 2, and 3 of how we're going to try to respond as an ethics commission. Also want to commend the idea of being aggressive by going to the ballot, because that gets people's attention. It clarifies issues in some ways. And I think that that is a way to show a level of seriousness about this. So kudos all the way around, and thank you for the hard work.
Commissioner Chu.
I'd like to associate myself with Commissioner Bell's comments, and just wanted to add that I appreciate the hard work. It's a tremendous amount of analysis and thought that went into it. Appreciate the outreach that you've done, and look forward to seeing a summary of what that is. Good luck with the meet and confer with the union going forward, and believe the two public commenters from the Fine Arts Museum and the Asian Art Museum were concerned about item 7, and that you'll be able to find time to meet with them and hear their concerns as well. But I think this is comprehensive and thorough and very, very clear, and agree with Commissioner Bell that the ballot is the optimal way to send a signal about how serious we are about reform. So thank you.
Thank you. I want to echo all my colleagues' comments. I just want to have one recommendation, which is the presentation that you just gave, Mr. Ford. It would be great if you could put it on our website with a highlight to let people know that this is what we're proposing for the January action, so that there will be another vehicle for folks to really access the information, because it's very thorough, it's very important for folks to know. And for many of them, they may not be able to read the 200 pages of documents that you prepare for us, but this is a great way for folks to understand. So if we have no more comments, let's open up for public comments on agenda item number 7.
Madam Chair, we are checking to see if there are callers in the queue. For those already on hold, please continue to wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted. If you've just joined this meeting, we are currently on the public discussion on the motion of agenda item number 7, discussion and possible action on proposal regarding a possible June 2022 ballot measure and regulation amendments to enact recommendations contained in Report on Gifts Laws, Part A, Gifts to Individuals, dated August 2nd, 2021, and Reports on Gift Laws, Part B, Gifts to City Departments, dated September 29th, 2021, and Report on Reinforcing Basic Ethics Provisions, dated December 6th, 2021. If you've not already done so, please press star 3 to be added to the public comment queue. You will have 3 minutes to provide your public comment, 6 minutes if you're online with an interpreter. You'll hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. Please stand by. Madam Chair, we have a caller in the queue. Welcome, caller. Your 3 minutes begins now.
Thank you, Ethics Commission. This is Lisa Pagan again with the Office of Economic and Workforce Development. This is an extremely helpful presentation. We are still trying to understand the details of the proposed ballot initiative and do really appreciate your consideration of continuance to January to allow us more time to ask your staff questions as well about some of the details that we're still trying to understand. Thank you very much for considering a continuance of this item. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Please stand by. Welcome, caller. Your 3 minutes begins now.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Ralph Remington. I'm Director of Cultural Affairs at the San Francisco Arts Commission, and I appreciate the continuance that you all are recommending today. I would say that we have some serious concerns with some of the things that are proposed from the Arts Commission's perspective, and we definitely appreciate the extra time so that we can have time to delve into this further to see what we agree with and what we don't agree with. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, please stand by. Madam Chair, there are no further callers in the queue.
Okay, thank you. Well, public comment is closed. Just want to ask my colleagues, we have a couple more items for discussion today. One is a possible action required by us. It's now 12 o'clock. I wonder if you want to continue on or you want to take a 10-minute break.
I'd love to push through, but
Okay.
I'm okay with a break. I'd love to push through.
Let's push through. Agenda item number 8, discussion and possible actions on request for waiver of San Francisco campaign and governmental conduct code section 3.3-234A2, post-employment restriction for Ms. Marissa Rodriguez. I understand Ms. Rodriguez is also present. So let's have staff presentation first.
Thank you, Chair Lee. Yeah, I don't have a slide deck for this one, but I will just go ahead and kind of reiterate the basis of what is in the memo that's attached here to agenda item 8. So I'll start by talking about the law on this point. So there are post-employment restrictions that apply to city officials, people who serve as an officer or an employee of the city and county. And the point of having post-employment restrictions is to try to ensure that when individuals leave city service, that they do not then use city service as a way to improperly, or their recent city service as a way to improperly influence the decisions that are made by city government. So the post-employment restriction that is before you today is section 3.234A2 of the Campaign and Governmental Conduct Code. And that code section states that no current or former officer or employee of the city and county for 1 year after termination of his or her service or employment with any department, board, commission, office, or other unit of the city shall, with the intent to influence a government decision, communicate orally, in writing, or in any other manner on behalf of any other person, except the city and county, with any officer or employee of the department, board, commission, office, or other unit of government for which the officer or employee served. So now that's kind of long, but I think it's important to read it just to get all the different terms out and the general thrust of it. But the point of this rule, or the upshot of this rule, is that when you leave city employment for 1 year afterwards, you can't communicate on someone's behalf with the unit of government that you served and try and influence that unit of government. And again, the purpose is that you have relationships with that unit of government that you serve. They know you, or if they don't know you, they didn't directly interact with you, they may be aware that you were a city employee. It's possible that there could be a danger for undue influence or unfair advantage. It could also create the appearance of a revolving door, that people leave city government, they move over into the private sector, but then they turn around and continue to interact with city government to secure favorable outcomes for their new private employer or private clients. The regulations, Ethics Commission regulations, provide further clarity about how these rules work. In particular, there's a regulation that talks about what is a unit of government. That's kind of a special term that's used in this particular context, but there are factors to determine what constitutes a unit of government. So in particular, it refers to even if somebody works within a particular office, if that office is part of a larger unit of government, they are considered to have served that unit of government. And that becomes important in this case, as I'll explain in a moment. But the factors that are used are, one, whether the budget, personnel, and other operations of the employee's position, employee who's subject to this restriction, who controlled that? Was it within their own office, or was that another unit of government? Also, whether or not that employee's position is listed in its own section of the Campaign and Governmental Conduct Code for purposes of Form 700 filing, or is it subsumed into the list of a larger department? That would also tend to show that they served that other unit of government. Also, does the law creating that person's office indicate that they are a separate entity or part of a larger unit of government? And also the commission can consider other factors that it deems relevant. So that brings me to the current request. This request is made by Marissa Rodriguez, who until October 11th of this year was the director of the Office of Cannabis. And the Office of Cannabis is an office within the city administrator's office, and it oversees permits and grants and does other work around the regulation of cannabis in the city and county. And as I explained in the report, if you run through those factors, it's pretty clear that the Office of Cannabis under this code section should be considered part of the same unit of government, excuse me, as the city administrator's office. City administrator directly was involved in the operations of the office, The law creating the office indicates it's a subdivision of the city administrator's office. They don't have their own budget. Their budget is under the larger budget of the city administrator. The Campaign or Governmental Conduct Code section about Form 700 filing lists the Office of Cannabis under OCA, Office of the City Administrator. So that's fairly clear. Then there's another provision of this regulation that I talked about that says, in addition to being prohibited from contacting your former department, or rather your former unit of government, I should say, you're also prohibited from contacting for 1 year any other department that unit of government directs or controls. I think the actual word is under the direction and control in the regulation. So that means that Ms. Rodriguez, as former director of the Office of Cannabis, would be prohibited from contacting, obviously, the Office of Cannabis under this law, but also from contacting the city administrator's office, since that's part of the same unit of government that she served under those factors that I described. Additionally, she's prohibited from contacting any other department that is under the direction and control of the city administrator. And as you know, under the structure of the city and county, the city administrator's office oversees many different departments and offices and programs that are within the larger ambit of the city administrator, or also known as GSA. So that would mean that other offices such as the Entertainment Commission or DPW, which are under that structure, that GSA city administrator structure, she would also be prohibited from contacting. So the request that Ms. Rodriguez made for a waiver is that she be allowed to contact the city administrator's office, the Entertainment Commission, and the Department of Public Works, DPW. She did not request a waiver to contact the Office of Cannabis. She also talked about contacting other departments that the rule does not apply to. So although we're recommending that a waiver not be issued, that would not prevent her from contacting those other departments. So she talked about, I think, Rec and Park, police, DPH. Those are not part of the unit of government that she served, nor are they directed and controlled by the unit of government that she served, the city administrator's office. So the rule would not prohibit her from communicating with those offices. So the scope of her waiver request is just the city administrator's office, the Entertainment Commission, and DPW. So to take those in order, for the city administrator's office, we don't recommend that a waiver be issued because, for one, she was the director of the Office of Cannabis. She reported to 2 deputy city administrators, as well as the city administrator herself through a monthly reporting process. Also, I think when you just look at somebody who is a department head, that's a very high level position that comes with a lot of recognition and respect. It's somebody whose name would be known, and that really is important when you're looking at the potential for unfair advantage or undue influence. And I should have stated that. I think I failed to talk about that before I jumped in here. But although the commission can issue a waiver, the rule under both the statute and the regs about when a waiver can be issued in this situation is that it must not create the potential for unfair advantage or undue influence. And I think it's important to point out that this is different from other instances in the recent past where the commission has considered waivers for this particular post-employment restriction. In those other situations, the commission was considering a waiver for a former commissioner whose post on the commission could only be filled by somebody who represents a particular trade or profession or business. So in particular, I think the last one that the commission looked at was somebody who had to be a certain kind of architect in order to be appointed to the Historical Preservation Commission. Because of the very specific eligibility requirements for those kinds of positions, the law creates a much lower bar for when a waiver can be issued for those kinds of city officials. It's in recognition of the fact that because that commissioner has to have a certain professional background in order to fill that post on the commission, that there's necessarily going to be a certain level of crossover between their personal professional life and the subject matter that that commission administers. So in recognition of that inherent tension, the code sets a lower bar, and it basically is more focused on that person's need for a waiver. How will it impact them professionally and personally? How will it limit the appointing authority's ability to find qualified commissioners if the rule is going to be applied strictly? So there's a much lower bar. So if you recall those prior waiver applications, you'll remember a very different analysis that focused more on what would the impact be on this person if a waiver is not granted. That's not the case in this instance. Ms. Rodriguez was not a commissioner. She was not appointed to represent any particular profession or trade. So that special provision or special eligibility for a waiver is not applicable here. So instead, the much higher bar of the waiver would create no potential for undue influence or unfair advantage. That's the standard that applies to this kind of waiver request. So anyway, I should have stated that first before I started to jump in and talk about the actual waiver request. So with that in mind, now I'll talk about the particulars of the request. So she requests a waiver to communicate with the city administrator's office. And I won't repeat what I said earlier, but again, she was the head of a department. She reported directly to high-level administrators within the city administrator's office, including 2 deputy city administrators and the city administrator. So it's pretty hard to say that's not going to create any potential for undue influence or unfair advantage. So we think that is not a place where a waiver should be granted. For the Entertainment Commission, there's some degree of past interaction between Ms. Rodriguez and the Entertainment Commission. In particular, the Entertainment Commission has appointment authority over 1 seat on the Cannabis Oversight Committee. And that's actually an employee, one of the, I think, 5 employees at the Entertainment Commission sits on that Cannabis Oversight Committee, which is a committee that the Office of Cannabis interacts with. And then in addition, the Entertainment Commission was used to review grant applications for the Office of Cannabis. So there is some past history between her and that department. Even if there weren't, as we'll get to in a minute with DPW, it's still difficult to say that a department head in a closely, or a department that's closely overseen by the city administrator's office, it's part of the same structure, that would create no potential for undue influence or unfair advantage. Might be different if it was a lower level employee, somebody who didn't have as much visibility or authority, but when it's a department head, it becomes very different. So again, we're not recommending a waiver for the Entertainment Commission, for communications with the Entertainment Commission within this 1-year period. Likewise, we don't recommend a waiver for communications with the Department of Public Works. Ms. Rodriguez indicated that she didn't work with DPW at all because it's not involved in cannabis-related work. But the law is fairly clear that there doesn't have to be prior communications during the city service, nor does there have to be overlap between what the former city employee did in her city service and what this department that she anticipates communicating with does. The law says that the rule prohibits attempts to influence government decisions, including decisions in which the officer or employee had no prior involvement. And that's a quote from the code, or from the regs rather. So it does envision this, that it's not just things that you personally worked on. There's a different rule for that about matters that you were personally and substantially involved in, not participating in those after you leave city service. This rule is much more about will your past service, your past title, create some potential for undue influence or unfair advantage. And I think even in the instance of DPW, it was hard for us to conclude that her communicating with them would create no potential for undue influence and unfair advantage. Again, in large part just because of her high-level position. So that's the conclusion that we reached. Glad to answer any questions that you might have again about that. And again, Ms. Rodriguez is here and she's been given a link. I think she's on the call. So she's available to speak to you and answer questions that you might have.
Okay. If Ms. Rodriguez is on the call, maybe we can have her speak on her behalf before we have questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners, and to Mr. Ford. I appreciate you taking the time to hear from me. My name is Marissa Rodriguez, and yes, I am the former Director of the Office of Cannabis here in the City and County of San Francisco. I have most recently changed my role and job. I'm now the Executive Director of the Union Square Alliance here in San Francisco. Just a little bit about my background and history. Prior to my role as the Director of the Office of Cannabis, I was a prosecutor for the City and County of San Francisco. I take this process certainly very seriously and am held in that role certainly to a high standard, and I brought that standard to the Office of Cannabis. And I did so with an important purpose, so that when rolling out a regulatory scheme in that capacity, San Franciscans could feel safe and secure in knowing that a serious framework was set up for that work. And I'm here actually today because I appreciate and respect this capacity and of the Ethics Commission and this process, and certainly would not want there to be any appearance of any impropriety at any point ever. With that, I want to speak a little bit about the Office of Cannabis. The Office of Cannabis, as you can tell, is a very niche and specific area of work and law that oversees the regulatory process for our permitting scheme here in San Francisco. We work solely on the issue of cannabis. However, there was a premise, which was an equity premise, one that we wanted to ensure we had an equitable process for our permits. And as a result, because our foundation is based so heavily in equity, we were asked to also draft the mayor's legislation request that all city departments have an equity report. So in that capacity, I noted that in my request to this body that I did engage with other departments. However, the city administrator's office consists of 25 distinct and separate divisions. And I did not actually work with any of them. I never influenced any of their decisions. I didn't engage in any of their day-to-day. Cannabis was very niche and very specific. We do have an oversight body. And on that body, the Entertainment Commission does hold a seat. They hold that seat because they are a similar permitting process, a small office that also does permitting. But we did not engage in any day-to-day work at any point of any time. They never asked for our opinions on anything. There was never an opportunity to opine on anything to do with the Entertainment Commission. In fact, as you can imagine, with our city process for issuing RFPs, it can be quite cumbersome, and it's sometimes very difficult to find third parties who have no interest in your work or no overlap to review those applications. We thought that the Entertainment Commission would be perfect because there really isn't that nexus and that crossover. So they did serve as a third party along with some other people who serve on our committee that also don't have a direct nexus similar to, for example, the planning department, Department of Building Inspection, fire. Those are city agencies that we work closely with respect to the permitting process for cannabis. Entertainment Commission was not one of those. Why I chose this particular new role, I love cannabis and I certainly love serving the citizens of San Francisco. I'm a native, I grew up in San Francisco. I care about this city tremendously. After the pandemic, and during the pandemic, I was still the director of the Office of Cannabis. Like many of us on this call, I was concerned with how our budgets were going to be impacted given the economic impact that the pandemic had. And learning more about what drives our economy, certainly understanding the downtown being very important, and certainly Union Square. Coming down here, I was heartbroken to see all the businesses closed up, a lot of them still boarded up. And then of course, after the November 19th events with all the looting, it's been a real challenge and something that our city certainly depends upon in light of the fact that 37% of our sales tax base exists here in Union Square alone. So I thought it's really important that I do what I can to certainly serve this entity. I want to read, and I noted this in my report as well, that our mission here with the Alliance is to seek to create a high quality visitor experience by managing and activating public spaces, maintaining a clean and safe environment, attracting new investment, and advocating for the district's success. Our primary goal is to ensure that safety is maintained here, cleanliness is maintained here, and certainly the activation of public spaces. That is the basis of my work. And in order to bring back the economic vitality of this economic engine for our city, I need to be able to do that work. And that is why I'm here, and to really show you, commissioners, that I am not doing that is not going to create a potential for undue influence. And I'll explain now. With respect to the Entertainment Commission, I am required to do street closures so that I can have performances, street activations, art walks in our alleys and things like that. In my capacity, I need to reach out to them to file permits and do really what any other CBD or community business improvement district would do to get that job done. No way impacting a serious or policy-related governmental decision, just needing to ensure that these things can happen so that we can turn around the unfortunate perception of what's happening in our downtowns and bring a new energy and excitement with activities, really, like I mentioned, street concerts, art walks, and the other arts to our community. With respect to the Department of Public Works, I want to also emphasize with them, I had no interaction with the Department of Public Works. In fact, it's even a more discrete, separate department that is under the umbrella of the city administrator. However, they have their own separate budget to the city administrator's office. They just have the same HR functions. I did not engage with them, and in fact, as I was leaving, the new interim director was coming in, so we haven't actually formally met. And I wouldn't be typically engaging with that person. I would be engaging with whomever deals with sort of the streetscapes and other items. For example, street cleaning, crosswalks, illegal dumping, trimming back hazardous trees, graffiti that happens above 10 feet because my ambassadors will take care of that which happens below that. And other types of maintenance related activities in alleys and at Halliday Plaza, which we're really trying to help revitalize as well so that the community can enjoy these spaces. Again, not to unduly influence any governmental decision. I have no basis with respect to engaging in conversation around their policies or legislative items. This is the day-to-day. The day-to-day is really important and really critical right now, in particular for the Union Square area. And I really would like to be able to get that work done now more than ever. And 1 year would be an undue burden and hardship on me. So I'm hoping we can really look at this and balance my need to get the work done for the citizens of San Francisco here in a very day-to-day type way, not engaging in governmental decision-making, but really just needing to get these permits done and really needing to get this work done in this space. But certainly understanding Mr. Ford's point, I would like to submit on the matter of the city administrator herself, even though I primarily worked with her deputies, and the Entertainment Commission does not share the same deputy. We never actually had overlap in deputies at any point during my tenure. So with that, I want to thank you so much for taking my arguments into consideration. Really an important time for the Union Square community, for our city, and for us emerging successfully from this pandemic. And again, taking into consideration as well my background and the work that I've done, taking ethics and all ethics very seriously and understanding the importance of them. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez, and thank you for your service to the city. I see Commissioner Chu's hands up. Do you have a comment,
Oh, I'm
Commissioner
sorry.
Chu?
That was from before.
Oh, okay. Do we have any other comments from the commissioners? If not, let us go to public comments.
I had a question. I was just wondering, what is the year? When would the year start and end so that if you were restricted from doing this work, is it, till February, or is it like, till, you understand my question?
Thank you. Yes, my understanding is it would be until next October.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, Shirley, I do have a question. I'm sorry, for Ms. Rodriguez, if I may. Ms. Rodriguez, how large is your staff, if any, at the Union Square organization?
Yes, we have a staff of 10 and an intern and doing different types of work, member services, responding to calls and things like that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Public comments, please.
Madam Chair, we are checking to see if there are callers in the queue. For those already on hold, please continue to wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted. If you just joined this meeting, we are currently on the public discussion on the motion of agenda item number 8, discussion and possible action on request for waiver of SF Campaign and Governmental Conduct Code Section 3.234A2, post-employment restriction for Marissa Rodriguez. If you have not already done so, please press *3 to be added to the public comment queue. You will have 3 minutes to provide your public comment, 6 minutes if you're online with an interpreter. You'll hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. Please stand by. Madam Chair, there are no callers in the queue.
Okay, thank you. Public comment is closed. Ms. Rodriguez, I love Union Square. My office used to be near there, and when I first came back from college, the first 15, 20 years of my life, I would spend my weekends shopping and eating around Union Square. So what happened there is really heartbroken. So I commend you and the Union Square Alliance for doing everything you can to really bring back the Union Square that we love and we deserve. But at the same time, I am very concerned with, under the waiver allowance. One thing that's really concerns me is the appearance of undue influence that you, as a former member of the city family, may have. Yes, you may not have worked directly with the DPW or Entertainment Commission, but it's the appearance that I am having some concern with, because when they say undue advantage, that doesn't mean you knew that person, therefore you have the advantage. It's the appearance that you may have the undue advantage that other people who did not work, who might not have worked within the OCA would have. So if everything being equal, that is the one area that I am really concerned with. And I'm glad to hear that the Alliance is not a staff of one. There are other staff members who are carrying out the work under your direction. So I understand. So within the 10 people, there may be folks who are responsible for dealing with the city or other folks who could have worked with DPW, entertainment, OCA, instead of you making the direct calls. Would that be a good assumption? So even if you, let's just say if you did not get the waiver, someone else with that alliance would still be able to work with these three government bodies on behalf of the betterment of the Union Square community.
So thank you for that, and I appreciate that, and thank you for your kind words, Commissioner, regarding Union Square. I actually oversee the purview with respect to this particular type of work. So I would be that person, but I do have a staff, and I would ask them if I had to certainly engage with the city. We will make it work if we need to.
Thank you.
If I may, I do recall a scenario whereby a former supervisor left to do work for a similar organization as mine. By supervisor, I mean elected supervisor, and a waiver was indeed granted for similar type day-to-day work. I could be wrong, and perhaps Mr. Ford has a better recollection of that, but I think it has been done in the past. But I do understand that perhaps in light of recent events, maybe the sentiment has changed, and I certainly respect that as well.
And if I have one more question to Ms. Rodriguez, when you started your work with the city, as you went through, the ethics training and all the rules and regulations that you have to abide by, was it ever made clear to you that there's this 1 year transition period that, as a former city employee, there's certain things that you could not do? Was that part of your employee orientation?
It isn't one that stood out. I will say, not one that stood out. It's something that I actually learned as I was transitioning out more recently, and just in light of the type of work that I'm doing here, wanted to see if it would be possible to have a waiver, because to me, my interpretation is not that I would be, unduly influencing anyone and on any sort of governmental decision, that it was more day to day, and that I wanted to be able to do my job day to day, which is why I'm making this request, and certainly in light of the critical case here, not only just Union Square, but even our surrounding neighbors, working together with them, with the Tenderloin, Chinatown, and the downtown, all of us really impacted. So that's why I'm reaching out for the waiver, as I understand it, but I completely respect and understand the rule. And that is why I did not request a waiver from the Office of Cannabis. I will not, that's how I understood it to be, that the Office of Cannabis would be the department or division that I wouldn't engage with for 1 year. And without a doubt, that is not in my letter to the Ethics Commission. It was specifically to these other departments. I am free to engage with other departments. I think it's the city administrator's office is a very interesting and unique construct, as far as there's all these divisions that are discrete and fall underneath it, but even the Department of Technology and the Department of Public Works are separate departments, but just fall under the umbrella because of the HR function. So it's a very unique setup, but I did not ask for a waiver for the Office of Cannabis, as I understand that is where I come from, and I would have the most. No meeting that with my staff, I wouldn't do that. And so I think with other distinct organizations, as individuals leave those departments, let's say I was leaving office, I would be, that 1 year would apply to that office and not any other offices in the city, even if people knew me. Yeah, so that's where I sort of stand on this.
Thank you. the way I understand it from the staff is we have, there are 3 waiver requests. One is with the city administrator. The second one was the Entertainment Commission. The third one is Department of Public Works. I think we can either have a motion to address all 3 together or individually. So number 1, if we can agree, if we can act in total or separately, what's your pleasure?
And if I may, Commissioner Lee, I submitted on the issue with respect to the city administrator, so that's no longer one that needs to be voted on. I will not engage with city administrator's office.
Okay.
So it stands DPW and entertainment. Thank you.
Okay. So just 2.
Commissioner Lee, if I could hear from Mr. Ford in response to the question of day-to-day versus policy. In terms of why they denied the waiver, in what Ms. Rodriguez is saying, it's just kind of day-to-day functionary things. We're just trying to, get an art walk going, or, put up ice skating rinks or something like that, versus policy. If Mr. Ford could respond, if he thinks there's a response, that would help me tremendously.
Yeah, sure thing, Commissioner Bell. Yeah, I mean, the answer is that the law doesn't distinguish, and the law is pretty clear that it's all-encompassing. It says, with the intent to influence a government decision, it does not go into any details about what types of decisions. Anything that rises to the level of a decision would be covered.
So it's almost like a strict liability. I mean, it's almost like that once you do it, regardless of what's underneath it, then it's covered.
That's right. And I could imagine, some analysis around what constitutes a decision. So for example, if somebody left service of Park and Rec, and then later they wanted to get a permit to have a picnic table, to reserve a picnic table, that's probably something that's not going to constitute a government decision. So that person it would be okay for them to go online and reserve a picnic table. That would not be considered an intent to influence a decision by Rec and Park. So things that are like that, very small things that don't constitute decisions, wouldn't be subject to, but something that rises to the level of somebody analyzing or determining on something, that's going to be a decision.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have a motion?
Chair Lee, could I just add one follow-up comment responding to Commissioner Bell's question? So Mr. Ford is absolutely correct in terms of the initial scope of the 1-year post-employment communication ban. But the commission can certainly, within its discretion, I guess, shape the nature of the waiver it wishes to grant. So if it's feasible, and again, I would defer to Mr. Ford on the feasibility of it, there could be sort of some intermediate position where perhaps some category of communications with TBW could be considered, something that the Ethics Commission would be comfortable with in terms of granting a waiver. It doesn't necessarily need to be an all or nothing thing. Thank you.
Any comments, Mr. Ford?
On Deputy City Attorney Shen's proposal? Not something we've looked at, not something we recommend. That seems, very difficult to implement in practice. And I would really rather have the analysis hinge on what constitutes a decision. And if there are certain de minimis things that don't constitute decisions, if we could give advice on that, what kinds of communications are subject to the rule, which ones are outside of the rule. But within things that definitely do constitute decisions, I would recommend allowing communications around some decisions and not others.
Okay, if there's no more questions, do we have a motion?
I move. I have a motion to consider the 2 items together.
Okay.
The 2 remaining items together.
Okay. Second?
I'll second.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. So the first motion is to collapse the 2 items that enter the waiver, a proposed waiver to the Entertainment Commission and to the Department of Public Works. But this motion is not to approve a waiver. This is just to collapse the two.
Correct.
To be considered as one. Okay. Roll call, please.
A motion has been made and seconded. I will now call the roll. Commissioner Bush.
Aye.
Commissioner Chu.
Aye.
Chair Lee.
Aye.
Commissioner Bell.
Aye.
With 4 votes in the affirmative and 0 votes opposed, the motion is approved unanimously.
So now do we have a second motion whether to grant or deny the waiver request?
I so move a motion to make that decision.
To
grant or deny. Or must my motion be one or the other?
Yeah. I think because we've already decided that we were going to consider both together. So now we have to decide whether we would grant the waiver or deny the waiver request.
Also, through the chair, maybe Deputy City Attorney Shen could chime in, but my understanding would be that granting the waiver does require a motion. Not granting a waiver does not require a motion. The regs state that to grant the motion, the commission must make a finding that the waiver does not create a potential for undue influence or unfair advantage. It doesn't talk about not granting waivers. I'm not sure that a motion is needed there, but I would defer to Mr. Shen on that.
Okay.
Mr. Ford is correct. The Ethics Commission only needs a majority vote to grant the waivers in question. But then it would probably be helpful to provide some clarity about what the further steps would be. For example, I don't know if the commission is contemplating continuing this matter for another meeting or simply sort of ending the discussion for today.
Okay, my understanding was we need to take the action whether to grant or deny the waiver request. So now that there's clarity, if there's no, we can either make a motion to grant her request, or we just take no action.
Well, and also to be clear, again, just for the sake of clarity, if you don't mind, Chair Lee, I mean, if the inclination of the commission is to deny the waiver request, I think it would be better in order to sort of dispose of the matter, so to speak, it would be better to make that motion as well here today.
Okay. So let's see if we can have a motion either way.
Thank you.
I would make the motion to deny her request for the Entertainment Commission as well as the Department of Public Works.
I'll second.
Are we going to discuss this motion now?
Yes.
My question about the Department of Public Works is whether the denial aspects change once the DPW has its own commission. I've read that the Board of Supervisors has set a timetable for appointment of the new commission over DPW be by July 1st. So is our denial because it doesn't have a commission and changes when it does?
If you don't mind, Chair Lee, I can respond to that question from Commissioner Bush.
Thank you.
All right. So under Proposition B, the Department of Public Works will become separate from the GSA, but it's unlikely to happen until September 1 of 2022. So as a practical matter, that would only change the impact of the one-year post-employment communications ban from Ms. Rodriguez by only a month. because I believe she's separated from the city in October.
Okay. I thought that the board passed something that set a timetable to act by July 1st, including the appointments by the mayor, but maybe I've read too quickly.
Right, and so I believe you do actually have the accurate information, Commissioner Bush. Those appointments would happen by July 1st, but in terms of actually transitioning the department to the jurisdiction of that separate commission, my understanding is that would not be effective until September 1, 22.
Okay.
So as a practical matter, it only changes the impact of this ban on Ms. Rodriguez's actions for about a month.
Point noted.
Thank you.
Okay. Call the roll, please.
A motion has been made and seconded. I will now call the roll. Commissioner Bush?
Aye.
Commissioner Chu?
Aye.
Chair Lee?
Aye.
Commissioner Bell?
Nay.
With 3 votes in the affirmative and 1 vote opposed, the motion is approved.
Thank you much, Ms. Rodriguez. I want to wish you all the luck on behalf of the city. It's a very difficult vote for me, knowing your passion and your skill set. It's under what we have to operate with, and especially given the current environment with the optics. I just want to wish you nothing but the best, and the Union Square Alliance.
Thank you, commissioners. I appreciate it. I certainly understand the environment, and will do my best and wanted to at least try. So thank you very much. Everyone have a great day and weekend, and come down to Union Square.
We will.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Now let's go to agenda item number 9, the Executive Director's Report. Director Powell?
Thank you, Chair Lee. The report this month has a number of updates for you. I know, given the time frame, that you may have be interested in questions. I just wanted to highlight a couple of items from the report of note. One is that as we approach January 1st, we're happy to report that the Form 700 e-filing project, which will introduce electronic filing finally for all designated filers for Form 700s, is on track to launch in January. So we look forward to giving you more information about that. Rachel Gage, who's the project manager for that effort, has been working tremendously with her team to make that happen. I also want to acknowledge the tremendous work that department filing officers have provided. Their insights and their constant attention and focus has really been critical to our ability to get this far. So we will keep working hard over the next several weeks, but just wanted to let you know that's on track as planned. We have some new dashboards that we've introduced online, and I know that the Commission's expressed an interest in having a preview and a further discussion of those, and we'd be happy to schedule that given all the other items that may be coming up as well, but we could certainly have Tyler Field and others on staff to walk through those dashboards. And speaking of transparency efforts, one of the exciting things to note this week, the campaign, the nonprofit Washington, D.C. based Campaign Legal Center that you're familiar with, I believe, issued a report just this week on Monday that talked about the top 10 transparency upgrades for ethics commissions. I've linked to that report in my executive director's report this month. It is a report that highlights public transparency work, not just at our agency, but at others, 9 others or 8 others around the country that they have cited as being innovative transparency solutions that ethics commissions have established to help engage the public, help inform officials, and help enforce the law. So if you have questions about that or would like more information, we'd of course be happy to invite our friends from the colleagues from the CLC who have obviously been following our work and the work of other local and state agencies around the country in that area. There is also, as you know, coming up in January, it will be budget season. The mayor's office, budget office will be issuing directions, instructions to departments at the department head meeting next Wednesday. And so we expect that we'll have further information that we prepare in advance of that January public hearing. As you know, the public engagement process for the city's budget ordinances requires 2 public hearings by departments. We've planned our first for January 21st. And then as we have in past couple of years, we'll have the February meeting at this point scheduled for the specific hearing on our departmental budget submission that we have planned. Lastly, a couple of items on the hiring front. We have but we're working with the Department of Human Resources to finalize the position for our ethics work program manager. So we're anticipating having that out soon. And we are also now moving into the stage of application review for some of the other key positions that we have had posted for the last month. So we are continuing to make our hiring process a very top priority for us. And as always, we'll look forward to providing more updates for you when those processes have completed. Other than that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have for me.
Okay. Questions for the director? Commissioner Chu.
Yes, if not January, then hope maybe at the February meeting. Director Pelham, if we could have Mr. Field and others on the team and do a presentation through on the new dashboards, that would be really helpful, especially with the June election coming up. It'd be good to have a refresher and another look at the tools that make this really valuable information available and accessible and very comprehensible to the public and for us as well.
Thank you.
If not, let's open up for public comments. Sorry, Commissioner Bush.
Thank you. And Director Pelham, thank you for the work you're doing. In addition, I'd like to see that we have more information on some specific items that have been brought up in the past. Like, what can you give us on the status of a lobbyist audit or lobbyist revamping of what is disclosed in the process now?
Commissioner Bush, are you asking for an update on the lobbying audit program?
Yes.
Is that what you're asking about? Yeah, the audit team is working on the lobbying audit program, as you indicated. I believe it was last month. The time frame was shifted because of competing priorities through December 31st, and that's the target that we're working on now to have processes put in place. The process has shifted, so we will likely start audits in the first calendar quarter of 2022. And we can certainly provide a further update as planned at the January meeting.
So at this point, something that will be transparent to the public in terms of audit results will be by the end of March?
No, the audit is likely to begin the first quarter. So it's likely that there would be a completion and something to report on in terms of audit results by the end of the fiscal year. June 30th.
Is there any way to accelerate that process?
We would have to stop doing public financing audits from the 2019 and 2020 audit cycle, which of course are a critical priority given that we're moving into the 2022 elections. And we would also have to, that would impact our ability to start the Form 700 post-filing compliance review process that we also need to plan, given that we'll have online filers of some 4,000 of them starting in April. So there are other constraints that we're operating with, but the audit team has been focused, I know, with great clarity and focus this month and trying to meet that adjusted deadline.
My sense is that going to the end of the fiscal year is not going to be viewed by the public as us moving forward at a deliberate speed. What about a contract with the controller, since they have auditors and are familiar with our process?
We have been also in conversation with the Controller's Office and the Office of Contract Administration to identify how we could secure our own external auditing functions. We are not able, unfortunately, to piggyback on an auditing contract that the Controller's Office has, so that's a dead end for us. And so it requires us to basically initiate a new contract, which, as you might imagine, is a quite cumbersome process, but it's something we're still in conversation to figure out how we could do that most expeditiously. I think it would be unfair to suggest to you or to the public that external audits are going to be an option for us this fiscal year.
Financially or for other reasons?
For both. We don't have the contract in place as a city that it would enable us to piggyback to get those services in time to do an audit in this fiscal year. So we're using all our internal resources to do what we can as quickly as we can. And we'll be happy to keep reporting over the next several months to let you know if the progress is happening or if there are more impediments coming in our way. We are trying to make sure that there are no impediments.
I appreciate that you have impediments, and I appreciate you have talented staff who are working to move it forward. But I also am aware of the fact that the board could easily step in and decide to do some actions that would put a focus on their ability to move these things forward. And I don't know what that ability is, but I do know that there have now been several measures at the board to split off work from ethics into other areas. And so I don't want to see us have a vulnerability that we can protect against by showing our good work. So that's one of the imperatives, in my view, of how we need to move forward.
I appreciate that feedback, Commissioner. And as you know, we share that imperative. We're doing everything that we can, and we look forward to reporting to you and the public on further progress.
Are you in touch with members of the board to let them know what you're doing?
I am not in touch with the board to let them know what we do. Our work we do independently, and we try to provide as much transparency at these meetings as we can and in our reports. So it's no secret that we are working with the priorities that the commission has set, that the BLA has already set for us. So every time we issue a report on an update on the BLA's audit, we assume, and I'm happy to further outreach to the board if that's useful. I assume that the board is fully aware of our reports that we issue to the commission publicly. But anyway, those are our priorities, and we continue to work on them with all due speed.
So in our January meeting on the budget, is this something that we would want to include?
I don't have an answer for you yet on that. I'm not sure what it is that you were looking to include. I think the larger issue on external auditing is the city's contracting process. We have not been able to piggyback on existing contracts. We would need to initiate one. And that is a process that takes a significant amount of focus and time working with the departments. And we have had those conversations. We are in the middle of those conversations, and I'm happy to report back as we can in January. Certainly, if there is a financial impact, we will bring that forward. We know that we need to bring forward any request to make sure we've got the resources to do our job, including requires external auditors.
I'm responding to the fact that when I asked, is it financial or is it other? And you said it's both. So I'm looking at the part that's financial because we're going to have a meeting on that. That's why I brought that back forward.
I think for us, the issue on public financing audits is not the problem. We have finances. The public fund, as you know, allows for a certain amount to be used for administrative costs. We have used that for external audits in the past. But again, even securing those audits is the issue. The issue could be one, and we're studying this right now, and we'll report in January if it is. The issue for doing lobbying audits is that we do not have a bucket of money presently that can be dedicated for that purpose. So we will certainly come back, Commissioner Bush, if there is any kind of issue about us not being able to secure external auditors because there's a funding gap. We will make sure to put that on the radar.
Just to educate me, if you'll indulge me one step further, when you talk about the extensive time involved in creating a contract and getting it approved, what is that time that you look at? What do you estimate it to be?
It's certainly longer than 6 months, and I'm happy to invite contract administration folks to share with you any data points that they have. It is. I don't have that information, but I'm happy to provide as much as I can for you at the January meeting. But it is certainly longer than 6 months.
It's longer than 6 months to get a contract put out and then approved?
Yes.
It's called bureaucracy.
Yeah, it is. But on the other hand, I bet it doesn't take that long to get something approved about a streetcar or something where people have to get to work. So
Well,
it is whatever it will be. You guys are going to tell us, and that's all we could ask is that you give us a picture of what it is that you're confronted by. And so if contract administration wants to join in, I think that's a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
Since the director has offered, I would ask that we place the mid-year update report at our next meeting. I want to make sure that we are aware that this commission has been operating below its full capacity because of the pandemic. Several staff members were reassigned to do COVID work. And even with the additional budget that allowed us to have additional staff, they're just slowly coming in. So I do appreciate the staff working really hard. It is frustrating to know that, we have all these important work to do, but we just do not have the staff and the resources to carry it out. Not because lack of attention is just very unfortunate. That I do appreciate all the comments to really help move this forward, because ultimately it is the city that really would benefit from our work. So let's have this on our January meeting. Right now it's looking quite full, so I'm glad that we have 2 meetings in January. Let's open up for public comments on this agenda item.
Madam Chair, we are checking to see if there are callers in the queue. For those already on hold, please continue to wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted. If you've just joined this meeting, we are currently on the public discussion on the motion of agenda item number 9, discussion of Executive Director's Report, an update of various programmatic and operational highlights of Ethics Commission staff activities since the Commission's previous meeting. If you have not already done so, please press *3 to be added to the public comment queue. You will have 3 minutes to provide your public comment, 6 minutes if you're online with an interpreter. You'll hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. Please stand by. Madam Chair, there are no callers in the queue.
Okay, discussion's closed. Agenda item number 10, discussion and possible actions on items for future meetings. I want to just add the couple of items that we've already committed to January. One is from Commissioner Chu, which is the dashboard presentation. So that should be on our January meeting. We could decide whether it's going to be in the 14th or the 21st meeting, because it seems like we're going to have 2 very full meetings. The second one is the update on the audit. And the third one I really want to add on is because we've been bringing this up for the last several meetings, which is the whistleblower presentation. I think this is one item Commissioner Bell had brought up a couple of times. And now that we know that January may possibly be possibly be his one of his last meetings. I definitely want to make sure that we have this discussion and we have his input while he is with us. So those are the 3 items that we should include in the January meeting, of course, with the continuation of the ballot measure. So we do have a pretty full January schedule. If we have any more items to add, Commissioner Chu?
Thank you, Chair. I would only just note from the top of our meeting, the discussion about the potential times for a meeting in January is that it is a Friday and before a 3-day weekend, and with the goal of having a later start in order to enable public participation or hopefully encourage more public participation. I think that also cuts the other way. Starting a meeting at 4 o'clock on a Friday before a 3-day weekend likely is not the best time for public participation. So I just wanted to note that when we are considering the start times that we'll be sending into Executive Director Pelham.
Great point. Commissioner Bush?
Yes, I wonder if we could have a presentation on the, I don't know if you call them the dashboards, the systems that we have for public transparency. So for example, if you go on the behested payments data that we link to, that's created by us, it is pretty much impenetrable for the average citizen. It's organized for the benefit of specialists in data, but not for public participation. And I urge any of you to go on to the data file that we have linked up on who's making behested payments, how much it amounts to, and what they're for, and when it was done. And then I'll give you a little quiz. See if you can answer the questions after you look at it. Because I can't, and I work at that kind of stuff all the time. So I think in larger sense, we need to have something on the agenda to deal with how transparent the data is that we put out to the public. So that's an issue that I think is important.
Okay.
Through the chair, maybe I can just a quick follow-up to Commissioner Bush's comment. The FPPC actually just considered regulations to change how the behested payment filings work, and they did not follow our recommendation that local jurisdictions should be permitted to mandate electronic filing. And it's that feature of state law that makes the data the way it is. And I can assure you that we completely agree with that, and we deal with problems of people trying to access the data periodically. And we've been trying to move towards universal e-filing for a long time, and we're prevented from doing so by the state.
But even if the state doesn't require it or set up a system for it, can't we have our own data, even if it's just a Word file or an Excel sheet of some kind that would tell people what they want to know most of all? I mean, if I were to look at that and say, what are the number 1, 2, and 3 behested payments so far this year, and who made them, and to whom do they go? Good luck. I can't figure that out. Not without a lot of work.
If I might, through the chair, I think Commissioner Chu had suggested February for a dashboard presentation. So perhaps it sounds like this might be folded into that, to be able to walk through the dashboards to give you a sense of how they currently work, some thoughts on how they might work, improve going forward, but doing that in the February timeframe after the policy and budget issues are resolved.
Okay, so that will be February?
The February,
okay.
February meeting, I believe.
Okay, perfect.
And as you you remind me of another point that I wanted to make, which is in future, I'd like to see at the end of each agenda a list of pending commissioner requests for action and a timetable for them, as well as a list of recent state or federal actions that impact what we're doing, like their work on behested payments. It's sort of like what the Board of Supervisors does on each of the agenda for their board meetings. At the end of the agenda, they put the measures that have been pending and are on a 30-day clock for some sort of action. So if we could use that as a model, although tweaking it for our own purposes, I think that would help the public and me.
Through the chair, if I might, Commissioner Bush, one of the things that we have teed up is once the phase 3 ethics package project is done, is bringing back to the commission the the policy prioritization plan. And that may be something that you're familiar with from prior years. What we will do is to bring all of those list of pending items, policy matters, requests, so that the commission can look at them and as a body sort of schedule them and sequence them in a way that makes sense, so that both the public and the commission can plan its work around engaging at those times, given what the commission sees as a priority. So we have that ready to go following this next completion of action on the existing policy plan. So happy to bring that forward to you.
And when would you
part of 2022?
When would you think that might be something we would see?
Well, I think given the agenda and the policy items still on the radar for the January meetings, it would likely be after the commission takes action on the current policy discussion that is underway.
Right, but I mean,
so that would be perhaps February.
To create the policy priority calendar. When do you think that might happen?
It could happen as early as February, depending on if the commission is completed.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm suddenly thinking June, but February is much better than June. Thank you.
Okay. Did we call for public comment on this agenda item?
Okay, please stand by. Just as a friendly reminder to all participants, when you raise your hand to speak, and if you are done speaking, if you can, please lower your hand, because it leaves a visual saying that you still have something left to say, or you need something else, or you wanted to kind of be called on also, just to let you know. So if you can please just remember to get in the habit of raising and lowering your hand. Thank you. Okay. Madam Chair, we are checking to see if there are callers in the queue. For those already on hold, please continue to wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted. If you have just joined this meeting, we are currently on public discussion of the motion of agenda item 10, discussion and possible action on items for future meetings. If you have not already done so, please press *3 to be added to the public comment queue. You will have 3 minutes to provide your public comment, 6 minutes if you're online with an interpreter. You'll hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. Please stand by. Madam Chair, there are no callers in the queue.
Okay, thank you. Public comment is closed. I just want to remind my fellow commissioners that since this is a short month, if we can submit to the director our desired meeting times for the next meeting, that I think that would be really helpful. So if we can send it in by either no later than Monday morning, I think that would be good. Agenda item number 11, additional opportunities for public comment on matters appearing or not appearing on the agenda.
Okay, Madam Chair, we are checking to see if there are callers in the queue. For those already on hold, please continue to wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted. If you just joined this meeting, we are currently on the public discussion on the motion of agenda item number 11, additional opportunities for public comment on matters appearing or not appearing on the agenda pursuant to the Ethics Commission bylaws, Article 7, Section 2. If you have not already done so, please press star 3 to be added to the public comment queue. You will have 3 minutes to provide your public comment, 6 minutes if you're online with an interpreter. You'll hear a bell go off when you have 30 seconds remaining. Please stand by. Madam Chair, there are no callers in the queue.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 12 is not up for discussion, which is adjournment. I want to thank everybody for your patience and your valuable insights. I wish all of you a very happy holiday season, and please stay safe, healthy, and happy. See you in 2022.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you, Chairley. Thank you, everyone.